But as far as allowing them in the secondary dwelling, it simply says, subject to the city undertaking a study, in certain conditions, it may be appropriate to permit them on lots of existing single detached dwellings. But no such study has been undertaken, no such study has been completed, and we're in a bit of a policy vacuum. So the concern is, well, are we going to allow one off? Is that going to prejudice this ultimate study? I'm going to suggest to you later on in my presentation it will not prejudice anything. It's fairly basic rudimentary planning that we're dealing with. So we have this policy vacuum, and planning staff have said the only way Mr. and Mrs. Bardul should be allowed this secondary unit is to treat it as that granny flat that Mr. Robichaud was talking about, temporary for aging parents. Well, that's not what we applied for. We applied from day one for a permanent second apartment unit, which is what the Planning Act has called for. So the only type of detached second dwelling unit that staff and your UHOP now will consider is that garden suite. Because of the pending legal action, the Barduls reluctantly agreed to proceed as a garden suite back in August, the summer of last year. We went to July Planning Committee, and at that time it was deferred because proper notice had not been given. For some reason, the neighborhood wasn't notified correctly. And plus, we raised a concern, as Ms. McPhail outlined, there's a holding provision that we're not that comfortable with and we think is totally unnecessary. So we raised a concern. The matter was tabled. We come back to the August meeting, and Mr. Kovacevic and Legal Services suddenly, before Planning Committee, said, hey, wait a minute, we can't proceed as a garden suite because it's not a temporary building. The building's permanent. The building has a basement. The building's hooked up to sewer and water. You can't treat it as that garden suite. So the matter was deferred again. Along comes the municipal election break, October, November, December. Here we are, January 2015. It's been almost 2 years, and sometimes the most simple applications take the longest. And you know, it is what it is. The process we followed. So before you today, you have a staff report supporting the second unit, but only as a temporary use. We've been there as a temporary use. We've tried that. The Barduls do not agree with the temporary use provisions anymore. We are, on their behalf, requesting it as a permanent use. And the reason is, temporary use is not appropriate when you've got a permanent structure. We have the permanent garage. You saw the photographs that Ms. McPhail presented of the neighborhood and the streetscape. You can't tell that this is out of character. It's permanent. It's been there for 30 years. It's part of that character, and it's a permanent structure. At the same time, your engineering staff are saying those service connections that were put in 1980 whatever are not appropriate. You need new service connections. So your engineering staff are saying you got to service it like a permanent structure, but your planners are saying but you can only use it temporarily. So there's a disconnect. And when you're looking at $10,000, $15,000 to put in permanent service laterals for temporary use, it just doesn't make sense. That temporary use bylaw also has to be renewed every 3 years at a price. Right now, a routine zoning application is almost $11,000. So add that to the mix. And if the whole intent is that we're trying to create affordable second apartments, you know, the 10 grand in the applications, the 10, 12 servicing, that adds $300, $400, $500 a month to rent to cover a building like this. It's no longer affordable. And again, staff are still treating this as a garden suite, that it's only meant for aging parents, and that's not our situation. Yes, we have aging parents in it, but once they no longer require it, then it would become a regular apartment type of unit. So the owners are respectfully requesting that the second dwelling unit be allowed, but as a permanent use. We talked about precedent, and would this create a precedent? And we've looked at other municipalities that have second apartment unit policies in detached structures, in the carriage houses that Mr. Robichaud talked about, and they're in fact allowed and encouraged on corner lots such as what we have here, because you've got that side street to take advantage of for access and parking and servicing. They also require them to blend into the character of the neighborhood. You've seen the photographs. This building does blend into the neighborhood. It's been there for 30 years. One of the other requirements is to provide additional parking, and we can easily provide the 2 parking spaces that staff have asked for. The fourth requirement that other municipalities require is compliance with building and fire codes. Well, that goes without saying. You want to create a safe situation, and through that site plan process and building permit processes, fire codes and building codes will be adhered to. And the last criteria that other municipalities apply is that you must have sufficient services and utilities, and clearly we have those. So as far as setting a precedent for a future study, if you apply these best practices from other municipalities, clearly this project will comply, and clearly we're not going to set an undesirable standard. My last concern, members of committee, is the use of a holding provision, and whether it's a temporary use or a permanent use, we feel that an H is just not appropriate. Typically, we put an H on a property when the pipe is 30 meters away and it's got to be brought here, or if the pump house doesn't have enough capacity, and Mr. Oldham, you know, he was here telling you he needed a booster pump to expand. If there's some infrastructure needs that are required, put an H on the property. The infrastructure comes in, you remove the H. That's how it typically works. Here, staff have identified a site plan, a servicing plan, and a development agreement are needed to remove the H. And that development agreement, as Steve indicated, it's more or less that granny flat. Again, it specifies occupants, period of occupancy, removal requirements, securities. If I were to put a second apartment unit in a house, you wouldn't ask for that development agreement. Why would you ask for it because it's the second unit is in a detached structure? It just doesn't make sense. The final site plan approval for an H is also redundant. This is redevelopment, and it's automatically subject to a site plan. So you don't need an H. It's like wearing a belt and suspenders. You don't need them both. We are subject to a site plan automatically. You don't need it as a condition of H removal. And as part of that site plan process, you require servicing drawings. Your engineering department has to review and approve servicing drawings as part of a site plan agreement. Why make it a condition of H? Again, belt and suspenders. It's redundant. And the last one is that development agreement. That's required for that granny suite where we know it's temporary. We know when the aging parents no longer require, the crane comes in and that structure is removed. That does not apply to permanent second dwellings permitted anywhere else in the city of Hamilton, and it should not be a requirement for the removal of the H. Members of committee, this second dwelling will blend in with the character of the streetscape. I know there are some neighbors that are concerned, but not one neighbor has raised any adverse impacts. And that's what planning is all about. Is there an adverse impact? Is it too big? Is it too close? Is it too high? Is it too loud? Is it too noisy? None of those concerns raised adverse impacts. They simply don't like it. We are respectfully requesting that the application be approved as a permanent use. We're requesting that the bylaw be revised to remove the holding provision and the holding requirements. And that concludes my presentation. Thank you.
All right. Thank you. Thank you, John. Councillor Collins and Councillor Farr. Councillor Collins.
Thanks, Madam Chairman. And John, you heard my questions to staff earlier. I'm still trying to understand how we essentially arrive at a situation where we have a second residential home on the lot without any approvals being applied for in the past, other than what I heard was the 1970s application to permit a garage with, and I can't recall what the answer was to the basement aspect of it, but essentially there was permission for a second structure on the site, but certainly not as a residential home. Yes. And it's taken a complaint from the neighborhood to get us where we are today. Can you explain how that's occurred over the years with your knowledge of what the owners have done? Certainly, thank you, and through you, Madam Chair. The Bardouls, when they bought this property, it had the garage with the basement fully hooked up to sewer and water. So it was an existing structure on part of their residential property. When Peter retired and his sons took over the business, him and his wife decided, well, what will we do? We've retired. Well, we've got the place in Arizona. We only need to be in Mount Hope, 6 months of the year. We can move the son and his family into the main house, and we can go live in the garage
and convert it. And that's what they did. They didn't realize that there are zoning bylaws and regulations, that the building was there. All they did was add kitchen cabinets, the washrooms, the sewer, the furnace, that was all there already as a heated garage. So they simply thought they could reside in the garage on a seasonal basis initially while they wintered in Arizona. And that's how it came about. When they got the knock on the door from the bylaw officer, right away we sought remedies. How do we deal with this? Well, we can move out or we can apply to legalize it. We've asked to legalize it.
But it was sold as a garage when they purchased it.
That's correct, sir.
With additional amenities that most garages wouldn't have.
That's correct, sir.
They decided to use it as a second principal residence.
Yes.
Okay. I thought I heard you say through the presentation, and you heard the answers that were provided to me when I asked about the character of the neighborhood and why the owners wouldn't go through a severance, and our staff noted that it wouldn't be supported. And you, at the start of your presentation, almost through you, Madam Chairman, stated the exact same, that in fact you're aware of other severance applications in the neighborhood that have been not only, I'm assuming, denied by the city because they made their way to the OMB, but eventually denied by the OMB as well because they don't fit the character of the neighborhood. Does it not seem odd to you that we would find a way, using certain language within different policy structures, to legalize something that the city and the OMB recognize as something that's not a good character fit for the neighborhood?
Okay. Through you, Madam Chairman, here's the balancing act that we as planners have to deal with on a regular basis. We've got the province telling us, stop doing this, stop urban sprawl, and start doing this, intensify. So we have a neighborhood here which is fairly stable, fairly mature, fairly attractive. How do we intensify in that neighborhood if we do not allow severances? And the answer is second apartment units, either in the principal dwelling or in a detached dwelling, subject to proper control, and making it blend into the character of the neighborhood. So by allowing this, you're satisfying the provincial objectives of intensification very mildly, while still protecting that stable residential community. It's the win-win scenario here, Councillor.
Oh, yes, that's a very subjective, it's a very subjective issue, so I can understand why the neighbors are not happy, and most likely, I'm assuming, with those 3 other OMB appeals, the neighbors were probably played a role in that and were not satisfied with the changing character of what's being proposed here. So I have no further questions. I mean, this is one of those ones I understand the intent here, but I've certainly read the comments by Councillor Johnson. I know that she is anxious as well, and I know I'm kind of making a statement right now, but to speak to the tabling, as I understand it, Councillor Johnson was intent on this being dealt with today. I'm assuming you and your client were hoping for the same today. Are you interested in a tabling of this for any reason?
Through the chair to the councillor's questions, I extend my condolences to Councillor Johnson. I did not receive her email, however, so I don't know what issues she's raised. I've had some discussions with her. I wasn't aware of her opposition or her concerns till I've heard there's this email. My clients are willing to work with the councillor and committee and the neighbours, and if a tabling is in order, we would certainly accept that. But failing that, we would like a decision to be made because, the matter has been ongoing for almost 2 years.
Well, it sounds like since 2011 was the...
Correct. Yep.
Okay, those are the only questions I have for now.
Okay, thank you, Councillor. Councillor Farr, please.
Fair enough. Just on that last question by the previous speaker, John, understanding everyone's anxious, it appears to get this I resolve here today. The dwelling unit is occupied by folks that are in Arizona, and given today's temperature, I suspect they'll be there for some time.
Sure.
So I don't think a meeting or two from now bringing this back would hurt too much, given that they're not currently occupied. Would you not agree through the chair?
Through the chair, yes, I would agree with that, Councillor.
Councillor?
Because here, clearly there's 3 different objectives before us, and I'm frankly just a little confused as to which way turn on this. It might help to hear from some of the residents as well. Anyway, thank you. That's the only question I have.
Okay, thank you, Councillor. Councillor Pasuta, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair Partridge. The question I have, I want to put through to staff, if I may. And Mr. Arians had brought something up here, if I can get to the page. Mr. Arians' presentation, the Planning Act, 16(3), second unit policies. Could staff comment on what John has presented here? Up on the screen.
Through the chair to the councillor. Yes, that is an excerpt from the Planning Act. Through the Urban Hamilton official plan, we have a policy that states that they would be permitted in certain circumstances, subject to a study. So at the present time, staff has not yet undertaken such a study.
Councillor?
How long would that study take for you to do it? What is it comprised of? What would be there?
So through you, Madam Chairman, if I can assist. So the Planning Act is providing direction to municipalities to contain policies to permit secondary suites, whether they within the principal dwelling or as a garden suite arrangement. And we incorporated those policies into our official plan. But it does allow the municipality to establish the appropriate standards and regulations for either both the urban and the rural area as to where these secondary suites will be allowed under what circumstances. As part of the residential zoning bylaw review process, we will be looking at our intensification strategy and coming up with the appropriate regulations for secondary suites. You know, for example, the City of Hamilton zoning bylaw currently allows accessory apartments as of right in most residential zones, where some of the other municipal zoning bylaws don't allow them. Currently, there are no permissions in any of the zoning bylaws for a garden suite arrangement. They're always dealt with as a site-specific temporary use provision. So it'll probably be sometime, we're working on the residential zoning now, probably hoping to have that completed in 2017. It's the third. We're working on rural, then commercial, mixed use, and then residential. So that's when we anticipated coming back and having public discussions, public, consultation and engagement on what would be should we allow the secondary suites, under what circumstances, what conditions in terms of parkings, dwelling unit sizes, et cetera, and then bring that back to committee and council for their consideration and ultimately adoption through a new residential zoning bylaw.
Councillor?
So essentially we're about 2 years off.
Side of the story, very important here. So then through you, Madam Chair, so if, John, you're looking at Mr. Arians, John, you're looking at putting this through and having it as a permanent residence on the property, which could be rented out. Wouldn't be just for a family, but for renting out too, potentially down the road. Through you, Madam Chair?
That's correct, through you, Madam Chair. The intent of the Barduals is that this is a permanent structure. It's part of the neighborhood. They wish to be able to use it as a residential apartment. Right now, they are the tenants, Mr. and Mrs. Bardual. In the future, other people could be tenants within this building. Their request is for permanent, as per the Planning Act, either in an accessory building or in the main house.
Through you, Madam Chair, to John. John, I've been on planning for, I don't know why, 8 years now. I don't recall one like this before us. Have you ever dealt with one here at council chambers like this?
Through the chair, no. This is unique, and that's why it's not going to open the floodgates. It's not setting this huge precedent. They are those unique situations. Corner lots are candidates where. We've toured new urbanism projects in Oakville where you've got the rear laneways and the garage rows are at the rear laneway and the garages at the ends are all 2 stories because they've got apartments in them. It's something that's relatively new, and other municipalities are embracing it as a way to provide good, affordable rental housing while still maintaining neighborhood characters.
Chair, to staff too, same question. Have we dealt with a situation like this in the last few terms of council? Do we know? Through you, Madam Chair, to, I guess, Steve?
Steve?
Within the urban area to allow a secondary unit? I'm not aware of any within the urban area. Within the rural area, we did have some, and we did not support those. I mean, the information contained in the application form was that the owners wish to reside on the property to age in place to be close to their children and their grandchildren, which is consistent with the approach of a garden suite or quote-unquote granny flat. If Mr. Arians is now saying that he does not agree with the staff recommendation and he is asking committee to approve a permanent second dwelling unit on this property, then it would be my recommendation and advice to this committee that planning staff do not support a permanent second dwelling unit on this property within the detached garage. The garage was converted illegally. They are presently residing in that garage in an illegal situation. It was never inspected under the OBC requirements. We cannot guarantee that it meets OBC requirements. And therefore, that based on what Mr. Arians is asking the committee to approve, which would be a permanent second dwelling unit within the accessory building, planning staff's advice to committee would be to deny it. Planning staff were recommending approval of a garden suite on a temporary arrangement in accordance with our OP policies for garden suites.
Councillor Pacito?
Okay, and I think one last question to you, Madam Chair. So then, what John's presented here up there on the screen and what I've heard before, I guess this wouldn't be appealable to the OMB then?
Through you, Madam Chairman, only an accessory apartment zoning provisions would be appealable to the OMB. Based on our current OP policies as it relates to the garden suites, the residents would have the right to appeal, or the applicant always has the right to appeal council's decision. It only relates to third-party appeals. So where we were going to change the zoning to allow a basement apartment, say because our OP policies are already in place for that, the third parties would not have a right to an appeal. But that does not apply to the applicant seeking to appeal the decision of council or committee. As it relates to this specific application, because it's not a true garden suite, the property owners or the residents within the neighborhood have a right to appeal, and it will be up to the proponent to challenge that under the Planning Act. In speaking with Mr. Kovacevic yesterday, we would not, as staff, challenge a third-party appeal of council's decision should they choose to approve the application as recommended by staff.
Councillor? All right, and I have Councillor Green, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I withdrew my previous question, but since we're having the conversation, perhaps this will be an opportunity for me to learn a little bit about planning. I'm just curious, through you to the staff, what is this currently being taxed as? What's the classification in terms of taxation? Is it a single family or is it being taxed as a duplex?
Delia, do you have that information? Councillor, we'll just give them a moment to read the paperwork.
Sorry, the information we provided through Madam Chairman to the councillor, we have the taxes, what they're being charged, but we don't have whether it's classified as a multifamily residential property or as a single-family residential property. Looking at what they're being taxed, what they're paying in their annual taxes, I would think it's more aligned with just being taxed as a single-family residential property.
Okay, Councillor, and questions for the agent, if you have any?
It's more about trying to find out about the as of right, because I know in Ward 3, for instance, every unit has an as of right where they can become duplexes through a committee of adjustment and a minor variance. And so I guess what my earlier question that I deferred when staff was present was because I didn't have that understanding in terms of how we have inclusionary zoning downtown in the municipality of Hamilton, or in the old city of Hamilton, but it's not being applied in other areas. So I'm just curious in terms of what the new UHOP will provide for in terms of creating a standard that would be citywide for inclusionary zoning.
Through you, Madam Chairman, that is correct, that the City of Hamilton zoning bylaw does allow for an accessory dwelling in most residential properties, provided you meet certain minimum requirements relating to lot size, unit size, location of the dwelling, and making sure that the floor to ceiling height meets OBC requirements, where the other bylaws in the other municipalities do not contain those same provisions. And that is one of the things that we want to have that discussion as part of the residential intensification strategy, i.e. should there be a minimum lot size? I think it's 270 square meters. Should there be a minimum unit size? I think each unit has to be 700 square feet, more or less, and then the other OBC requirements and how we deal with parking, and then the exterior alterations. You know, are those regulations, that's an urban context, and then rural areas, then you also get into service and considerations as well. So that's one of the things that we want to look at moving forward. Can we use those same regulations or less stringent regulations or more stringent regulations to allow for accessory apartments as of right. Years ago, it used to be based on the age of the dwelling. Up until the 1980s, you had to have a dwelling built prior to 1971. What that resulted in was an over-concentration of conversion activity within selected areas of the city. So when the city updated its intensification, City of Hamilton redid its intensification strategy in late 80s, early 90s, they removed that age of dwelling requirement and they just went to those standard requirements. So whether it's property zone C in the lower city or up, at Rymal and Upper Sherman area, it would still, if it meets those minimum requirements, then an accessory apartment is permitted as of right. Stony Creek, Glanbrook, Ancaster, et cetera, bylaws do not contain those provisions. So we would be looking at having that discussion and dialogue with the community as to what would be appropriate regulations in the outlying former municipalities going forward. The Planning Act and the province does allow us to establish minimums, so we don't have to, under what standards will intensification happen in order to allow for intensification throughout all of the city to occur, whether it be in this situation or within an accessory apartment within dwellings.
Councillor?
Madam Chair, and I'm not sure if it'd be more appropriate for me to wait until the presentation is done and then continue my line of questioning, or could I just ask one more?
If you just have one more, I'll be lenient.
I guess the final question through you, and in direct relation to this comment, is what would be the likelihood, or is there a possibility that under our new official plan that this unit would be then in conforming?
Through you, Madam Chairman, because it doesn't meet as a garden suite, it wouldn't meet the requirements under the Planning Act because this is a permanent structure as opposed to a temporary structure. That's going to be a very the issue of whether we allow carriage houses or laneway houses in order to be converted to detached residential dwellings. That's going to be a broader discussion. There's a lot of issues associated with that and how we come around to that. So I'm not sure. I don't have an opinion one way or the other as to whether we will be definitively saying it's going to be permitted. The provisions in the House about allowing for accessory units, in my mind, more aligns itself with granny flat sort of situations in both the urban and the rural area, as opposed to permanent coach house arrangements. There have been a few that have occurred illegally over the years, and there's been problems associated with that in terms of from a fire and safety issues that we would need to investigate and be confident that there's not going to be any concerns going forward.
Okay, thank you, Madam Chair. Through you to the presenter. John, I appreciate your presentation. It's brought to light questions that I didn't have coming in, and certainly as it applies to the rest of the city, this seems like a very interesting case.
Okay, thank you. And Councillor Connolly, please.
Thank you.
Questions for the presenter.
John mentioned that if we approve the 3-year temporary, that they'd have to come back every 3 years to reapply, and it's $11,000 every 3 years. Is that accurate?
Through you, Madam Chairman, that is correct. Under our current table of tariff of fee bylaws, the temporary use provision, it would be treated as if it was a brand new application, and that fee is approximately $11,000.
Wow. So we could have this temporary for 21 years, and they'll be paying $88,000 for their permits, is that, for the applications.
Through you, Madam Chairman, that is correct. Or alternatively, I mean, we don't normally do a lot of temporary use bylaws, or that the temporary use bylaws get extended. There could be a direction to staff just to, as part of that, to take a look at the renewal of temporary use bylaws and what would be an appropriate fee. We did with one under the previous term of council where we agreed to work on a rebate for that individual because came in for a renewal. So that is something that maybe we could undertake as part of looking at removing some of the barriers to intensification or sort of these situations as to is the $11,000 fee the appropriate fee under those circumstances.
Okay, thank you very much, Madam Mayor.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Connolly. And Councillor Collins, will you take the chair for a moment, please? I have no other speakers on the list. So, John,
yes.
I just want to make it, just to clarify for this committee, that when I look at your respectfully request page, if you wouldn't mind putting that up, please. You're asking that the application be approved as a permanent use, and you're asking that the bylaw be revised to remove the holding provision and the holding requirement. So effectively, if I understand this, you're not in support of what the staff recommendation is.
Through the new chair to you, yes, that's correct. We started down the path of permanent apartment unit. We got sidetracked to the granny flat track because that's what staff was saying. We could only support it as that way. When legal services intervened and said you can't even do that, we're back on the permanent track for a apartment unit, second apartment unit.
All right, so then as I understand it, what you've got up here is what you want. You're not in agreement with what the staff has recommended. So even if we did approve what the staff has recommended, you may take it to the OMB, or certainly you don't support what the staff has.
That's correct, and it'll be up to Peter and Doreen to decide how far do they wish to pursue it. Our request to remove the holding would apply on either scenario, whether it's permanent or temporary. A holding is just overkill, in my respectful opinion.
All right, and John, thank you. I appreciate your answer to that. I just wanted the committee to absolutely understand that, even if we did agree with staff, that it still is not what you're asking for on behalf of your clients. So I thank you very much for that. And I have no other speakers. So may I have a motion to receive the, oh, sorry, John, go ahead.
If I could just conclude with one final comment. I know we're about to enter into public comments, and I would ask you to consider what really is the adverse impact. Thank you.
All right, thank you, John. Moved by Councillor Collins, seconded by Councillor Pasuta to receive the presentation. All in favor? Carried. Thank you very much. Now we'll hear from the public, and I'll invite Uma Eka, who's representing her client who owns 76 Spalding Drive, to please come to the podium. Welcome, Umo.
Good morning. Thank you, Madam Chair. Good morning, councillors and public. I'm here on behalf of Ghislaine Bellemeur, who lives at 76 Spalding Drive in Hamilton, Ontario, and he's opposing this property for 228 Seneca Avenue in Glanbrook today. Now, his arguments are that the property was constructed in 2011 without permission or adherence to the zoning bylaws. Now, the only reason that it's even brought before us today is because Mr. Bellemeur contacted the city and asked the city to investigate as construction was being done. And as a result of that, the bylaw enforcement has forced the resident or the owners of 228 to issue an application for the zoning for amendment to the laws. So as a result of this initial construction, and my client's concern is whether or not, if he had not contacted the city, we would have not known that this construction was ongoing. So he definitely opposes this whole application. And now we've recently learned that this application, the intent is to have it a permanent structure. And being a permanent structure is not in the best interest. He also states that it's not in comparison to the surrounding properties that are currently being built or that are in existence. They don't match the development, the structure, and the look as the rest of the properties. And his concern is that if this planning committee does allow the 3-year term, there's a good chance that this structure will become permanent and indefinite, and it'll be very difficult to remove at a later date. So with that being said, my client would like this request, the applicant's request, to be denied because it's not in the best interest of the community within his area.
All right, thank you, Umo. Appreciate you coming down. I do have a question. Councillor Farr, please.
Hi, I'm sorry, I did not catch your name.
Umo, U-M-O.
First of all, you're saying someone contacted the city. I didn't catch who that someone was. A neighbor of yours?
No, sorry. I'm here on behalf of Ghislaine Bellemeur of 76 Spalding Avenue. He contacted the city and filed a complaint with the enforcement with respect to the construction when it was ongoing in 2011.
Oh, you yourself, through you, Chair, do not live in this neighborhood?
No, I don't, Your Honor. No, sorry.
When was it the person you're representing, the neighbor you're representing, realized that somebody was living in
He has had ongoing complaints. He's mentioned that since 2011, he even mentioned that he contacted the police. There was an issue regarding, he said, noise complaints in that residence. So he claims that someone's been living there for a significant amount of time.
Councillor?
Can you give me through the chair what a significant amount of time, give or take a few years? What is that, 10 years, 20 years?
I would say from the construction in 2011 that he's referring to, yes.
Okay. But prior to that?
Prior to that, no.
Okay, and it was the construction through you, Chair, that rang a few bells and caused your, is it a client of yours? I'm sorry, I'm not.
It's my client.
It caused your client to make the necessary steps in a complaint. Okay, I thought maybe you could answer. Hopefully I'll have another resident or two that actually lives in the community to get an impact on what this resident or these residents who live there part-time are imposing or not imposing on that particular neighborhood. Thank you very much. Thank you, Madam Chair.
All right, thank you, Councillor. And I have Councillor Green, please.
Madam Chair, through you to Ms. Uma, I guess I'll ask the question that needs to be asked, which is, and I didn't quite hear it in the presentation, what are the ongoing adverse effects that are being experienced by the person that you're representing in this community?
He has advised that there are cars being parked on the street. He says it's not a physical. It doesn't measure up to the look of the rest of the homes. There's trucks being parked all over the place in front of the dwelling as opposed to the side. It blocks the street. His unit is directly opposite to the back of where the garden suite is located.
So through you, Madam Chair, just so I'm clear, the issues primarily that are ongoing are regarding parking. Is that correct?
That is one of the complaints, and the other complaint is also noise. He has indicated there was noise coming from that particular dwelling.
Madam Chair, through you, and so you're mentioning that perhaps at a certain time and place the police had been called. If that is the case, do you have any kind of record of that call or anything like that?
I currently don't have, but I'm sure we can. No.
Okay, Madam Chair, that I think answers all my questions. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Councillor Green. And thank you, Umo. And I appreciate you coming down and representing the resident on Balding. Thank you.
Thank you.
A motion to receive, please. Councillor Green, Councillor Conley, all in favor?
Carried.
That is carried. All right. We'll move on to the public now. Members of the public wishing to address the committee, please come down to the podium. Write your name, address, postal code, and telephone number on the sheet provided prior to speaking. Is there anyone else that wishes to address the committee on this item? I have to do this 3 times. Is there anyone else who wishes to address the committee on this item? Is there anyone else that wishes to address the committee on this item? Okay, seeing none. May I have a motion to receive the public presentations and to close the public meeting? Councillor Conley, Councillor Aidan Johnson, all in favor? Okay, that is carried. Now, that brings us to the staff report, and I'll need a motion or questions, comments. Councillor Collins, please.
Madam Chairman, in light of the concerns raised by Councillor Johnson and the fact that we have a positive report that the applicant does not support, I would be more comfortable, especially in light of legal's concerns that have been noted since the mid last year, I'd be more comfortable denying the application that we have in front of us if I have a seconder.
All right, and I'll need a seconder for that. Councillor just let me get a seconder and get it on the floor. So I have a seconder and Councillor Pasuta. All right, Councillor Farr, go ahead, please.
I'm just not clear. Denying the application, if I can ask the mover, or do you mean not denying the report, the recommendation?
Yes,
okay.
Denying the recommendation, yes.
Okay, so through you to staff, where would that leave us? To you, Steve.
Who would like to address that?
Understanding that there's maybe only part-time, but throughout the year there's still someone living in the dwelling.
So through you, Madam Chairman, if the staff recommendation is denied, then the the use will continue as an illegal use on the property, and there'd be requirement for MLE would then proceed. I assume MLE would then take the next steps to issue the necessary orders to bring the property into conformity with the zoning bylaw, which would require that the use of that, the second dwelling unit on the property, that use cease.
Councillor?
Through you to MLE, Marty or whomever. So what sort of time frame would you be looking at to bring to fruition the cease and desist order?
We'll just give them a minute to confer.
Understanding, Madam Chair, that there's already some municipal law enforcement activity with respect to this residence.
Yes.
Through you, Madam Chairman, the only other one qualifier to my comment was if the appellant or if the applicant appeals council's decision to deny the application to the OMB, then it's my understanding that MLE will hold any enforcement action in abeyance until such time as that OMB process concludes, which could be, I think, Mr. Kovacevic, probably 6 to 12 months, probably before we got a hearing date.
Through you, Madam Chair, I would predict, in this type of circumstance, yes, probably at least 6 to 8 months before a hearing date.
Right.
So through you to Mike, and my final question would be, given the as per usual, the sort of high-level comments made by legal as it respects this file and the recommendation, now we hear a motion on the floor and seconded, Mike, that suggests just not even going with the staff recommendation, a 3-year temporary. And given your comments earlier about how we may contemplate in-camera discussion just based on the recommendation that was before us, having this motion now on the floor through you, Chair, your thoughts or whatever you may publicly be able to disclose on that comment earlier, Mike.
Mike?
Through you, Madam Chair, I believe denying the recommendations is consistent with staff's recommendation based on Mr. Arians' submissions. Planning staff no longer support the application if the applicant wants to proceed as Mr. Arians suggested. So committee's action, the motion is therefore consistent with planning staff's recommendation to you at this time based on the new information provided by Mr. Arians.
Okay, thank you, Councillor.
So to the point that the IBI or John has suggested they're not even in favor of the recommendation, they wanted just to legalize.
That's
okay,
correct.
Thank you.
All right, thank you, Councillor Farr. Councillor Collins for a second time.
Sorry, Madam Chairman, and I didn't, traditionally I don't speak on behalf of other members of council, but Councillor Johnson was quite clear in her correspondence to us that it would be her intent at the end of this process, failing some kind of a agreed upon go forward resolution, that she's interested in working with the applicant to ensure that the building is reconverted over a period of several years. So she understands the circumstances of those people living there and what kind of disruption it would cause if in fact the building had to be deconverted back into a garage or other type of use rather than a separate entity or separate secondary structure. So I just want to be clear that, in fact, with the denial, it would be Councillor Johnson's intent to work with the applicant and Mr. Arians to seek some kind of resolution over a period of years, certainly not being heavy-handed in using MLE through that process, but working with MLE and the applicant to find a successful resolution. So that would be the second part of it, and I think that's Councillor Johnson's made that quite clear since she sent us those.
Thank you, Councillor Collins. I appreciate you passing those comments on. All right, so we have a motion on the floor by Councillor Collins, seconded by Councillor Pasuta to deny the application. All in favor? Carried. Anyone opposed? We have Councillor Conley and Councillor Green who are opposed. All right, thank you, everyone. Good work on that. Now we're moving on to item 6.3, which is the application for an amendment excuse me, to the City of Hamilton zoning bylaw number 05-200 for lands located at 98 James Street South in Hamilton, which is in Ward 2. May I have a motion, please, to receive the added written comments concerning this matter? And we'll do them all. So that would be from Doug Harrison, David Church, and Lynn Sweeney. Moved by Councillor Aidan Johnson, seconded by Councillor Farr. All in favor, please. That is carried. Thank you. All right, so members of the public, in accordance with the provisions of the Planning Act, please be advised that if a person or public body does not make oral submissions at a public meeting or make written submissions to the Council of the City of Hamilton before Council approves the zoning bylaw amendment, the person or public body is not entitled to appeal the decision of the Council of the City of Hamilton to the Ontario Municipal Board, and the person or public body may not be added as a party to the hearing of an appeal before the Ontario Municipal Board unless, in the opinion of the board, there are reasonable grounds to do so. Now, we do have some registered speakers who will be speaking to this, but first I'd like to start with the staff presentation, and we welcome Mr. Edward John to the podium, please.
Good morning, Chair, members of committee, and members of the public. I'll just add that I may keep going to my water as there's quite a density issue with coming from the Grand Cayman to Hamilton here today, so bear with me while I deal with that.
And welcome back, by the way.
Thank you. Happy to be here. The application before you today is for a rezoning for lands at 98 James Street South in downtown Hamilton.
Yeah, Edward, can you just get rid of that? Yeah, thank you. Thank you.
The application is to amend the City of Hamilton zoning bylaw 05200 in order to permit an adaptive reuse of a designated building, James Street Baptist Church, integrating a new 30-story mixed-use building, including a 3-story podium and an at-grade commercial patio. The proposal is for a maximum of 259 residential units, commercial retail on the first 2 floors, and a multi-level underground parking facility using a parking stacking system accessed by Jackson Street West, providing for a total of 122 parking spaces. As seen in the location map here, the property forms part of the Durand neighborhood, located at the intersection of James Street South and Jackson Street West, and is located within downtown Hamilton. The proposed 30-story mixed-use building has been designed as a point tower, erected on a 3-story podium. The partially demolished James Street Baptist Church has been integrated into the podium design and will function as an integral component of the redeveloped site as it fronts onto James Street South. Just quickly take you through some of the photographs of the area. I know we're all aware of its location, just for context purposes. Photo 1 here illustrates the frontage along James Street and obviously the portion of the church that has been retained and will be integrated into the design of the podium and point tower. Photo 2 is a view across James Street towards the YMCA and down towards the GO station in the back there. Photo 3 is a view along Jackson Street. You can see the church here shown in the foreground. Photo 4 is a view east along Jackson once again. We have a view along James Street North, a view north along McNabb, a view of the adjacent Bell building, and finally a view of the adjacent buildings on James. As established in those photographs, the character of the area can be described as eclectic, one in part derivative from the fact it is at the intersection of 2 streets, being James Street and Jackson Street, and that development and redevelopment has and is occurring within the vicinity of the subject lands. Jackson Street West contains a mixture of uses, including office and institutional uses, with these uses provided in buildings with varying forms, typologies, styles, and setbacks. The adjacent church, St. Paul's, is a mid-19th century building in the Gothic Revival style, whereas immediately adjacent to the subject lands is a 5-story office building accommodating the Bell Canadian building. James Street South similarly houses a variety of different forms, predominantly retail and service-related uses, with a number of notable large-scale uses, including the 6-story YMCA building and the GO rail station and rail line. James Street South provides a more continuous but still varied built edge and a wider right-of-way. Immediately to the south of the subject lands is the property at 100 James Street South, which is a low-profile, single-story commercial building with continuous frontage along James Street. In response to the public notice and pre-circulation, 7 responses were received. Following review of the comments, both from the public and internal and external agencies, several determining aspects were raised and considered in detail within the staff report. These issues included parking, height, construction impacts, heritage considerations, and discussion of the demolition of the former church. With regard to parking, the applicant submitted a parking justification report and subsequent addendum report. The original application sought to permit 98 spaces to serve a total of 259 units. The spaces would be provided in a form of an underground parking stacking system and unbundled such that these parking spaces would be sold separately from the units. The studies noted a number of geographical opportunities based on the subject lands, proximity to comprehensive transit, and the wide range of existing services available within walking distance of the site. The studies also reviewed the availability of parking lots within the area, both public and private. In addition, offered a number of transportation demand management opportunities, including car share and bike parking. While planning staff acknowledged the opportunity to consider reduced parking ratios at this particular location, it was their opinion that based on the balance of factors, the number of spaces at 98 should be increased. Discussions were held with the applicant, and in response, the applicant agreed to provide an additional 24 spaces through the provision of a further level of underground stacked parking. As shown in this chart, this brought the total number of parking spaces up to 122 spaces and resulted in a required reduction from the existing bylaw of 71 spaces. Planning staff are now satisfied that the proposed amount of parking will represent an appropriate balance, one that would seek to actively encourage alternative transportation options while also avoiding any unacceptable loss of amenity that may otherwise precipitate from the reduced parking ratios. With regard to height, the applicant provided an urban design brief in support of the proposal. The design brief evaluated a number of aspects, including context, massing, sun shadow, and visual impact. As detailed within the report, contextually, the site offers the opportunity to explore the possibility of a taller building, with the surrounding area notable vistas from vantage points around the site framed by taller buildings. However, the immediate context is of a lower scale, and as such requires careful consideration of design techniques in order to appropriately and sensitively transition between the built forms. This is in order to protect the character and amenity of the area. Based on the number of design techniques, including the podium and point tower approach, it is considered that the proposal will provide a built form that will better define the scale and character of the area. Staff therefore consider the development of a 30-story, 106-meter point tower to sensitively address the design objectives of the official plan policy framework. With regard to heritage considerations and the partial demolition of the former James Street Baptist Church, staff have reviewed the impacts separately through the required heritage permit process. Furthermore, a number of design options, including the retention and reuse of materials and stained glass, have been incorporated and will be secured through the site plan process. Finally, construction impacts were raised as a concern, particularly given the large number of heritage resources both within and adjacent subject lands. As discussed within detail within the report, through the site plan stage, the applicant will be required to submit and have approved a construction management plan that will address any potential vibration impacts due to construction. In conclusion, staff considered the development to represent a significant opportunity to consider innovative and sustainable measures in which to accommodate increased residential and employment uses within the downtown. The proposed concept will satisfy numerous policy objectives contained within local and provincial documents and will facilitate a sensitive, adaptive reuse of a cultural heritage resource, which is both compatible with the area and respectful of the existing character. That concludes my presentation. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you very much, Edward. And so far I have Councillor Farr.
I wasn't heckling you there.
No.
Sure. Congratulations. I know among so many other things that you do with planning and economic development, this was a very big file, and clearly from the report and its many pages and all that was entailed, given this undoubtedly unprecedented development, you've done a tremendous job. I'll just say that. off the top. And once our delegates appear, I'm sure you'll be ready and available, understanding and appreciating their concerns and their correspondence. And I really probably could use a better word than concerns. But just if we could speak to the somewhat unprecedented nature of what's before us and how it relates to our growth targets and the type of growth we're trying to achieve in downtown Hamilton. Through you to Ed, Chair, we've set a few precedents here. I think this was the first design, for example, or development that went through our new design panel. We have an adaptive reuse that had some in the community work with senior staff, including Steve Robichaud and yourself and others from Heritage Planning, and sort of now we're in the midst of redefining the Heritage Permit Review process and how that all works, and delegated authority. So there's a whole lot of branches since this began, and as it has evolved, and I might say evolved rather quickly, all things considered, given those branches. So if you could speak just generally to what sort of impact this has on what we're trying to achieve in terms of growth and things like TDM in our core.
Edward?
Through the chair to the councillor, absolutely correct. This application pretty much has it all. It has the density. It has innovative adaptive reuse of cultural heritage resource. It has innovative technologies in the form of the parking stacking system. And certainly its location. I mean, I think as you would review through the report and based on the policy direction and vision document that we have in a new, I'll still call it, Urban Hamilton official plan, there are many policies that speak to encouraging density where it's appropriate and how to accommodate that appropriate density in the right locations. I think within the report it stipulates that this can benefit from its geographical location. You're close to the GO station, you're close to the McNabb Transit Hub. You're really, in the middle of the important services, employment uses that exist, as we all know, in the downtown, and certainly many of our policies are trying to create the catalyst for development, certainly similar to this in terms of the density. Once again, that density and how it's organized, developed, and designed has to be appropriate. We have the opportunity to review the application through the design review panel. We've had our own urban designers review the application, and there have been a number of protracted pre-submission discussions and negotiations through the lifespan of the application in order to achieve ultimately, and I've used it many times in the report, but balance. The application itself, in my planning opinion, achieves that balance. There certainly is a large reduction in parking. That is offset with those policies which seek to encourage alternative modes of transportation, particularly where they're available. And I think everybody would agree that this location has that availability, both in terms of options and in terms of services. Once more, we have the cultural heritage aspect too, which is a further layer. And I think, when you look at how they've integrated the remaining portion of the church sensitively, there is some separation between the remaining portion of the church and the podium, so it has that architectural integrity maintained. And certainly through ongoing processes such as the site plan process and condominium, we'll continue to review construction impacts. We'll look at warning clauses, most notably towards the parking issue. But certainly, this is a new project in terms of its density that I don't believe downtown Hamilton has seen in a number of decades now. So it was an interesting one.
Through you, Chair, to Ed, not inconsistent with what other urban growth centers in other major cities would look toward as it relates to variances and maybe their own objectives to get more people transit proximities to their transit hubs, whether it's a GO station or a bus terminal like we have in our case. But this is something that other urban growth areas or central city planning has contemplated and achieved throughout, I'm sure, Canada and the U.S. at least.
Through the chair to the council, you're correct. Our growth strategy obviously focuses on the downtown, it being both in provincial documentation, places to grow as an urban growth centre. It's identified as the focus for growth. Our own OP designates 250 people or jobs per hectare. This exceeds that, but obviously we understand that not all locations are equally as advantageous as this location in terms of accommodating that density, and so it's the goal to achieve that throughout the area, and so we have to take advantage and accommodate appropriate densities when they come along.
Which I think is really important. And again, I know some of our delegates are going to raise some issues, and we'll be able to share their comments, questions, and concerns with Edward and other staff as we move forward. But finally, just looking at the breakdown on the footprints of these many units, 30 stories, 3 commercial, the rest residential. 98 of them are very small units, which may translate to even more less of a car reliant or parking spot reliant scenario.
Through the chair to the councillor, certainly that has been our opinion based on our current bylaw provisions within 05200. We do identify that 50 square meters or less is that threshold to which we consider the 0.3 spaces per unit parking ratio, and the assumption being that yes, they are smaller units. There will be less demand potentially, therefore, for the parking. And once again, layer on top the location, you've got all those individual opportunities which would give further support to the idea of reduced parking ratios.
And so, given that, and through you, Madam Chair, I think is it safe to assume that when you put all of those pieces together, in addition to a condominium purchase application, in fact, in this case, I don't know of any other where you actually buy the condo and parking is a separate deal altogether in every case for the limited amount of spots that they have. It's a separate purchase, separate from the actual condo agreement. That alone, I mean, indicates to me and that it's a buyer beware, or a buyer is aware each and every purchase, and that would be in the condo application process. Through you, Madam Chair, to Ed.
Edward?
Through the chair to the councillor, once again, you're correct. With transportation demand management, which is basically a theory on how you deal with certain demands and how you meet certain expectations with regard to parking, this site has several opportunities to look at alternative forms. There is a carrot and a stick, and certainly the unbundling of parking, so you would buy your parking space separate to the unit. At the very first instance, identifies that financially there's a cost to parking your car, and that will hopefully provide some type of encouragement to those people, particularly buying the smaller units, to contemplate using the existing, and I emphasize that throughout the report, the existing availability of infrastructure to accommodate their travel needs outside of private automobile ownership. And so it's that carrot which, you can buy an affordable unit, or at least a unit which doesn't compensate for the parking space separately. And then once you identify the cost of the parking space, you will also, through the condominium process, be provided with warning clauses about no access to permits for on-street parking because there are multiple dwellings, and also that there will be a limit, obviously, in terms of the amount of spaces available within the building.
Councillor?
Yeah, and in addition to that, within 400, 500 meters of the Connolly, or of this proposed development, soon to be the Connolly, there's really waiting lists galore at both public and private operated surface lots.
Through the councillor, through the chair to the councillor, there are parking lots within the vicinity, and it is my understanding that there is a high utilization of those parking lots. I think with this particular application, what you will find is that while there may be reluctance to completely give up the automobile, what they may contemplate is parking that automobile further away from their place of residence because of the infrequent nature in which they use the automobile. So it does make more a greater opportunity for them to consider parking areas off-site and maybe at over 400 meters away from the site in which to have their weekend car. But like I said, there's a lot of discussion throughout the report on the nature of the parking situation. We've identified that there is a large reduction, but certainly when you piece all the individual components together, the evidence is such that this leads it to be successful and wouldn't have a lack of impact or a negative impact on the amenity of existing residents.
All right. the very last sentence again, please.
And it's unlikely to have a negative impact on the existing residents who rely on on-street parking.
So I didn't clearly define. I mean, there is just, basically, in short, through you, and my final question, Madam Chair, to Edward, and I'm sure there'll be more later when we respond to some of the residents and their presentation. There really is no options in anywhere around. I mean, the whole circumference, the whole diameter, within 400 or 500 meters, there is no other option for parking. So that's pretty much summing it up.
Through the chair to the councillor, there certainly is limited option within the circumference of the site up to the 300 meters.
No permits, no
for on-street parking. That's correct.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Collins, please.
Thanks, Madam Chairman. And first, I too want to commend staff at all levels for really giving priority to this project. The Connolly, for all intents and purposes, I think Councillor Farr said it best. The height of the building combined with the adaptive reuse makes it a poster child for intensification. And so I want to commend staff. And I had the opportunity the other day to speak to Mr. Thorne. And as I understand it, it's one of those first projects, not just through the gate as it relates to the Design Review Committee, but as I understand it, our Open for Business template was sort of thrown at this one. And can I just ask through you then, we received this application when? And we certainly know today's date.
Edward?
Through the chair to the councillor, I don't recall the specific date, but I do recall counting the days. So I think it was just 121 days from submission, from deeming it complete to actually coming here today. So
our staff need to be commended for that, because we've clearly sent a message through process and policy improvements. And again, from top to bottom, the planning department has certainly responded. There is one thing, though, and I think it's interesting to note, with all the development that we have in the core, that with the jobs and the employment and the cranes that come with some of these developments, and there have been a number of them in the past number of years, there's certainly there are additional taxes, revenues that come with this, which certainly alleviates some of the pressures that we have for the existing tax base, whether it be commercial or residential. There's nothing in the report that I could find, Mr. Chairman, and maybe I've overlooked it, that suggests what the new tax structure would be on this parcel of property that, with a church on it, has really not paid anything for probably almost a century now. So can I understand what the new tax structure will be on a development this size and what it means financially for the city?
Through the chair to the councillor, unfortunately I don't have any specific information on the tax, certainly because this is mixed use, so you have the commercial aspect. This isn't just solely residential, so there is that additional tax income received from the commercial aspects of this, but unfortunately, no, I don't have the tax information at hand.
I ask, Madam Chairman, that we have that for council. I think it is certainly something to celebrate, and I'm not presupposing what's going to happen with today's decision, and don't want to discount anything that's said from the community as part of the public delegations, but it's an important footnote to the story because we oftentimes sit around this table looking for new growth opportunities, and this is probably one of the best ones, if not the best one, to come along, maybe apart from the large development for Mr. Vranich across the street. This will be one of the biggest tax-producing new and residential investments for us. And again, I just want to thank everyone involved. I know oftentimes when these reports are in front of us, especially intensification, the last report's a good one, where we ask a lot of questions, and I know that there's a lot of community pushback. This is one of those ones that, if there is such a development that falls into the no-brainer category, for me, this is it, because it sort of... It satisfies all the tests, and I think your report clearly states that. So not too many questions, but more so praise for certainly Edward and the entire team that made this happen.
Okay, thank you, Councillor. And do I have any other questions for staff? Actually, can I turn the chair over to you? I just have one very quick question. Edward, thank you. Great presentation for this particular project. A few weeks or months ago, there was a high wind that came through the city, and my understanding is it knocked over one of the windows that had been removed, and it was one of the bigger ones. Can you just give me an update on what's happening with that? There was concern in the public that it had been destroyed.
Through the chair to the councillor, I remember witnessing that report as it came through on the spec, and yes, certainly it was troubling, and I'm not sure if we have the heritage officer here to give an update. I know they were quickly on site trying to repair what they could and once again secure it. So if I may, I will ask Alyssa just to provide an update.
Thank you, Alyssa.
Through the chair. So, yes, the salvaged transept window that was being stored on site had been blown over in the extreme winds. Staff received word of the incident having taken place and immediately were contacted by members of the construction staff for the site in terms of them being on site immediately. Unfortunately, there was some damage to a neighboring property. The window, having fallen over, was dragged back onto the site and has been internally secured with some temporary casing around the window and has been sealed in terms of water damage. So it's currently being stored still on site, but not within the same location that it was being stored. And this is an interim protection measure, and staff continue to be updated by the construction management crew in terms of they are providing interim reports throughout the winter. And the goal is that window, it appears as though it's only been minorly impacted by that fall. There's still a goal of restoring that window, whether it's in its entirety or in conjunction with some of the other salvage features in terms of their integration into the new proposed development.
Okay, and thank you for that through you, Chair. I think that's good news for the community, and certainly there was a great deal of concern. I even had a couple of calls to my office, about are we going to lose that window, just exactly what's happening. So, I commend staff for reacting so quickly to that as well, because, definitely a concern with the public, and it's good news to hear that the window is hopefully on track to being restored and incorporated back into the design of the building in some form or another. So thank you. Those are all the questions, comments that I have. Okay, thank you. Councillor Farr for a second time, please.
Yeah, I neglected to ask. This one was on my second page. So through you to Ed, you had mentioned off the top you had correspondence from 7 individuals, and there might have been a time not even that long ago where we'd have been full to the rafters and protests just in the parking issue alone as it relates to this development. So I would say that's very telling. I would also suggest that one of our pieces of correspondence in an update today was to pull out, or she was withdrawing her concern. And even to that, through you, Chair, it's not really, other than maybe one, a lot of issues that in your reading of the 6 pieces or 5 pieces of correspondence as it relates to this major downtown infill residential, commercial, mixed-use, sustainable development that can't be addressed. Through you, Chair.
Through the chair to the councillor, that's correct. Many of the letters raised some concerns, but they were considered concerns. They provided options. They clearly articulated those concerns, and certainly they were addressed within the report. But as you mentioned, 7 compared to most intensification projects that we receive is exceptionally low. I believe people obviously considered this to be similar to the staff recommendation, a balance of factors. While there is not going to be all issues dealt with in their entirety, certainly there's that balance, and I think many of those residents notified accepted that.
Okay, thank you. So I have no further speakers. May I have a motion to receive? Councillor Collins and Councillor Farr, please. Thank you very much, Edward. Now we'll move on to hear from the public, and we'll deal first of all with our registered speakers. I'll invite Janice Brown from the Durand Neighbourhood Association to please come down to the podium. I have him next on the agenda, so yes, I have no problem with that. Welcome, Jonathan.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
And you're also with?
On behalf of the Durand Neighborhood Association.
Okay, thank you very much.
So, good morning. Again, my name is Jonathan. I'm here on behalf of the Durand Neighborhood Association. The Durand Neighborhood Association is generally in favor of this development. We feel it's a good way to save what's left of a church. It's It's a good infill opportunity. It's a good way to densify downtown. We don't have an issue with the 30 stories. We think it's a good way to proceed, generally speaking. But we do have some serious concerns about the parking. And I'll keep my presentation fairly short. It's just 3 key points. But what I will just say is that it seems that the parking is unnecessarily low. And I'll elaborate that in some detail. So my first point will be, again, it's an inadequate amount of parking. Frankly, we do not have experience in Hamilton with such a dramatic reduction in parking. I think we're now at like just below 50% ratio here. It's a little bit low, and the reasoning that's been applied here is that we are just close to go, we're close to the HSR, and we simply don't need any more cars for these residents. The problem is that it's, as we can see from the responses some of our members have shown, is that it's contrary to the current experience that we have with the other large-scale developments downtown, mainly New Horizons and City Square. In City Square specifically, and you can see that reflected in the November 5th letter by Ms. Henderson at Appendix D of the report. She explains her experience with the parking situation at her building, which was at about 75 units and is filled to capacity with a number of cars. So the reality is that in Hamilton, we're still car dependent. People are still using their cars, and they will bring a car somehow. So we can reduce that somehow, and that's fine. That's a good development to reduce the car dependency, but I believe 50% is a little too ambitious. We cannot simply ignore the economic reality that people will bring some of their cars and they will want to park them somewhere downtown. So it will put greater pressure on the parking lots, which has staff already alluded to. There's no capacity in the downtown public lots, and we have no data in the project summary or by staff, but it's safe to assume that there's no capacity in the private lots either. There's simply nowhere to park. So what will happen is we will get a greater increase in the demand for asphalt parking lots, and we'll see more heritage buildings or any institutional buildings demolished to make way for these parking lots. It's a simple economic reality. If you increase the demand, you will increase the prices for parking. It will increase costs to businesses, and it will increase the demand to create more parking lots. That's not a good direction for the city, ultimately. You want to be able to accommodate some of this parking in the building itself. So, to keep it short, 50% is a little too low in my view. We should go up to at least 70%. And it's not a dramatic increase. We're talking between, 125 spots which are permitted right now to 145 approximately. I believe it will make a big difference. You will reduce the overflow dramatically. And it will at least allow for some more playroom in this development. A lot of the examples that we're giving in the project summary, and I'm talking here about the November 2014 report, which is really the source document for the staff report, this report prepared by Paradigm. They use examples from Toronto and examples from Manhattan as places where dramatic parking reductions have been successful. The problem is that in both of those places, they have subways. It's a much more mature city. They've been able to accommodate that type of overflow, that type of development, because they have much more developed infrastructure than we do. One example was given about Bloor Street, where businesses have been happy to give up on-street parking. Again, Bloor Street has a subway. We do not, right? If we give up a lot of parking in the downtown, that will impact businesses negatively. And we do not have an LRT yet. We do not have the proper infrastructure to accommodate the inflow of people. Now, my second point, which I'll keep very brief, is about the parking stacker technology. We haven't heard too much about that technology because it's fairly novel. And as I understand, we do not have anything like that in Hamilton at this moment. We have there are some examples in Toronto, there's some examples in other countries where it's been used successfully. The only example I've seen in the Paradigm report was of Zen Lofts in Toronto, which is not really applicable to ours. Number one, because it's Toronto. Number two, because it's a 35-unit development. So the example that was used, is quite more forgiving compared to a 259-unit development. So that should be kept in mind when we're looking at how to accommodate this type of parking, right? I mean, we're looking at a valet system, which in theory could pile up cars lining up outside this development. I mean, you're looking at one person going up and down elevators, driving down a car, 4 stories underground, and then coming back up to pick up another car. They're looking at a 3-minute timeline to try to move these cars up and down. There's no explanation how they get this timeline at all, but it seems to me a little bit too optimistic, right? When you're looking at moving large amounts of people, and we're looking here between anywhere between 35 cars to 59 cars an hour, as Paradigm states in their study, it seems a little difficult to visualize that in reality. How is that actually going to happen, right? And that's in the best of times. That's when we have electricity, when the infrastructure is functioning properly. There's nothing in the report to address how we're going to deal with a power outage. How are these machines going to work? There's nothing, so we simply don't know. I mean, my comment would be that it's a risk. You could potentially be looking at cars lining up on Jackson Street, trying to get into the driveway, waiting for a valet person to manually lower down the lifts and manually lifting out the cars into their spots. Again, that's not addressed in the report, but it's a real risk, and we probably should have some understanding of it before we proceed. So, you take these 2 points, right? Are there barriers to development? No. But it should be addressed, and there should be a mechanism to try to find a way to ameliorate the negative effect that this type of parking situation will have in downtown. I propose increasing the ratio to 70% from the current, I think, 49%. That would be a reasonable accommodation. And it's consistent with the overall utilization of cars right now as prescribed in the Big Move policy, which is projecting a 73% use of cars over the next 10 to 20 years. That's an overall rate. Right now we're at 89% as prescribed by the policy. So, we can accommodate that. I think Hamilton will move towards lower utilization of cars, but we shouldn't be prejudicing the economic development of this downtown by being overtly ambitious. Those would be my submissions. Thank you.
All right, thank you. And I have Councillor Farr, please. Questions?
Thank you. Jan, good to see you. You're quite a contributor and a fairly new one for the Durand Neighborhood Association. And I think today, if I'm not mistaken, through you, Chair, you're sharing a lot of Barb Henderson, another DNA executive member, a lot of her information, if I'm not correct, right? Which was great stuff. And you alluded to it through you, Chair. Barb lives in a fairly recently built condominium complex. It was to be a 3-phase development, but it's at Herkimer and Park. Would you not agree through the Chair that Herkimer and Park, roughly, in the heart of the Durand, really, is maybe a little bit different than the heart of downtown, which is essentially what we're dealing with here at Jackson and James North, given, and I speak to shops that you can walk to, trains you can take across the road, or buses you can take a block away, routes for bikes and that sort of thing, and I think 3 or 5 car shares are part of this plan through you, Chair. So would it be fair to suggest that phase 1 of the City Square development in the heart of Durand, where Barb lives, as it relates to this parking issue, is a bit different as it relates to the amenities and the proximity of those amenities, work, play amenities, shop amenities, through you, Chair?
Jonathan, through the chair.
Thank you, Madam Chair. It is true. That particular development is a little bit further away than downtown than this development, but I will note that City Square does have a close to 100% parking ratio. I believe it is a 90%, and it is up to capacity. So yes, you can reduce the parking in the downtown quite significantly from 100% requirement. So yeah, we should reduce it. The question is not necessarily whether it should be at 100% or 90% as it is in City Square, but rather should it be something between 50 and 70 or 50 and 80%. My preference would be 70%. I think that'd be a reasonable midway point, and it would reduce the the adverse effects. So yeah, City Square, different, but again, that's 100% utilization, right?
Yes, and fair enough. And I wanted, for the record, Barb did a really great job, and I found it helpful, as a matter of fact, and already referenced some of her parking stats and where we're at with overflow in the immediate area or waiting lists in the immediate area. So just for the record, Barb did a good job corresponding with staff on this report, and you're doing a good job translating some of what Barb said. And I don't know where she is today. Maybe she's in the Caribbean? Oh, okay. I'll bet it's through no fault of her own, says the president of the Durand Neighborhood Association. Thank you, Janice. So I noticed in our last 6.2, our last item, we had questions of staff while the delegate was before us. So can I do that now, or do you want to receive and then I can ask staff, or when will I be able to ask staff?
Actually, before we get to that, I was remiss in inviting the agent's applicant to come down and do a presentation. So after Jonathan is finished, then I'm going to do that.
Okay.
So,
So, Madam Chair, there was two things mentioned that Jonas presented that I would like to address with staff. So I'll defer to you with the appropriate time, but.
Yeah, well, if you've got a question, then I'm okay with you asking it, provided there isn't a series of questions that require engaging staff. Go ahead.
So I would receive Jonas unless there's further questions.
I have no other questioners, so a motion by Councillor Farr and Councillor Green to receive the presentation. Thank you, Jonathan. Appreciate it. Okay, go ahead. Questions for staff.
Through you to Marty. Ed, where are we with the council mandate on that RFI for a parkade? It was probably a year and a half ago, where we said, go seek private interest to build a parkade after we took a look at our downtown parking study review.
Through you, Madam Chair, we're in the process of discussions with 3 proponents in the downtown area right now.
3 proponents on a parkade, privately operated and built. Okay, good. And then to municipal law enforcement staff. Marty, or are you his designate right now, Ted? Scary prospect.
I'm hearing that you are, though.
I might wait on. Well, I maybe Ted could offer this. Actually, Ted could. Through you, Chair, to Ted Arnold, our Director of Parking. When and if the stacker is on the blitz, Jan made a very good point. What happens, and it was addressed with Barb's correspondence. And cars are piling up on the street, and they're piling up in areas where parking obviously isn't permitted. There's time regulations. There's no parking signs. We have in the past, in situations that are as rare as this may be, had what we call a non-enforcement. So is this one of those scenarios where in the event cars are lining up and parking maybe on either side of Jackson or along McNabb as they wait out, and maybe in unoccupied vehicles, some sort of disrepair, that we could do a non-enforcement on those occasions through you?
Ted?
Through you, Madam Chair, if I could start, this is definitely a concern of ourselves because it is a new form of technology that would be coming to Hamilton. We certainly would consider a non-enforcement, but it would definitely depend on safety issues, whether or not traffic can get through emergency vehicles and so on.
Okay, fair enough. And you nor I or probably anybody in here knows the specifics on the technology, but through you, I got a subsequent question based on what Ted has mentioned to whoever. I'm going to suggest Anita or Edward John. My assumption is just like anything else that would be part of this minor or major development, any development that where there are technologies involved, that will be inspected, and the appropriate inspections from real smart engineers will take place to ensure that we have a stacker that's both safe and reliable, right?
Anita?
Through the chair to the councillor, yes, absolutely. In addition, there is a manual override, so we're talking about if there was a power outage or any such circumstance, that there would be a manual override that would allow the stackers to still function. And I can just add that I do believe there's a representative from Paradigm here as well, and the agents and the applicants that could speak to the specifics of the stackers.
Thanks. Thanks. All the questions. Thank you.
All right. Thank you. And again, I apologize. I'm now going to invite Brenda Keys, the owner's agent, who wishes to address the committee. If you would please come down to the podium. Janice. All right, no problem. Hey, Brenda, if you could introduce your guest and start whenever you're ready, please.
Is it on?
Yep.
I'm Brenda Case from GSP Group in Hamilton. Happy to be here this afternoon. We've reached the afternoon. I have with me here today as well Stu Elkins from Paradigm Transportation Solutions, who can answer a number of those parking questions. As well, if necessary, we have Joanne McCallum up in the bleachers from McCallum Taylor Architects, as well as Louis Correa, who is representative of Stanton Renaissance, the owner of the development. So I'm not going to go into any great detail. Mr. John did a great job of presenting our overall proposal, which is a mixed-use retail condominium community representing, as Stanton Renaissance has branded it, as a living landmark in the heart of downtown Hamilton. I think one of the main things we'd like to talk about is the housing that this is going to bring to downtown Hamilton, which is something that will help generate the justification for our rapid transit system, help use our existing transit system and our GO Transit as well. So when you have people, there's a demand for those types of public transit uses. If you don't have the people, the demand is low, so it's a which comes first, the chicken and egg situation. We're fully supportive of Mr. John's report and recommendation. We do have two small corrections that need to be made to the draft bylaw, and they were our fault. They have to do with the percentage of glazing that's permitted on the ground floor of the ground floor facade for James Street and Jackson Street. As you can see in this particular drawing, a good portion of the side facade along Jackson Street contains the existing church that occupied the property. So in the zoning bylaw that you have before you, if you go to page 2 of Appendix B, if you want to open up your reports, it identifies a minimum amount of glazing that's allowed. Right now, the bylaw requires 37% glazing for the ground floor facade along Jackson Street, and we've done some calculations, and it turns out that we have 30% glazing in that particular area right now, and that has to do with the fact that we have the existing structure which doesn't have any glazing on the first level, as you can see, as well as the need for an entrance in along further to the west, where the entrance to the underground garage is. In addition, if you look at the front portion of the building where the existing church is, there's no changes that are being proposed at all to the front portion of the building, and that percentage is also incorrect. It should be changed to 11% versus 31% glazing. So these are the actual percent of the front portion of the ground floor that has windows or doors and those types of things. So the zoning bylaw has required that 31% of the ground floor along James Street have glazing, and only 11% of the building has glazing. So those are just 2 minor modifications that we're requesting at this time. But otherwise, we're fully supportive of the report and the draft bylaw. This is very much a transit-oriented development, and I think that's what has raised so many issues with the community as well. And what makes it a great development is the fact that it will rely on public transit. And unlike the New Horizons type development, or City Square, which is located further to the west in Hamilton, more in the heart of a community, this is right in the center of the city. So we have access to the GO station almost right across the street. You've got our main bus service along James Street. You're close to the McNabb Transit Terminal. You're also close to the future, I think it's the A line, the future A line along James Street, the future B line along King or Main Streets. We have many sources of public transit available to us, and the type of people that will be buying these units are not your typical Hamiltonians that rely on cars. These are new people that are moving into our community. They have a different outlook on the type of units they're looking at. We have units that are under 50 square meters in size, which through our public open house, we found people were saying, oh, who would want a unit that small? These are different people. These are not your Hamiltonians moving to a 50 square meter unit to downsize from the suburbs. So it's a very different market, and I think that's exactly what Hamilton is looking for and needs for this type of development. I'd like to pass the podium on to Stu Elkins, who is going to talk about a lot of these transit-oriented initiatives that are being proposed. So we're proposing 122 parking spaces on 4 levels of underground parking through a parking stacker system, which Stu will talk to you about, as well as introducing a car share opportunities, secure bike facilities, and I think we're even doing subsidized transit passes, which are in the report as well. So all of these things will be addressed through the condominium process and the site plan approval process, but we're making every effort to provide alternatives for people versus having a car.
Hi, good afternoon. As Brenda has mentioned, I'm Stu Elkins with Paradigm Transportation Solutions. I'm here this afternoon to try and enlighten the committee a little bit on stackers and the details, and in hopes to maybe address some of the comments and concerns that have been expressed. So the stackers are to be operated by a valet service. There's a stacker system, an independent one, on each of the 4 levels of the underground parking. So on levels 1, 2, and 3, there'll be a double stacker system. So that's one basically at grade and then a stacking level above. And then on levels 4, there'll be a 3-level or triple stacker. And again, that's 3 high and the X number wide to accommodate the 122 parking spaces. The stacker system to operate, we've talked and consulted with the manufacturer of the stacker system, and they've confirmed that it will take less than 2 minutes, okay, for the stacker to park the vehicle. And then in our analyses, we included another minute for the valet service provider to bring the vehicle up or down to the at-grade loading areas on Jackson. In the rare situation where there is a power outage, we have designed a Kogan backup power system, essentially a backup generator. Okay, so in the rare occasion that there is a power outage, that generator would be in place and manage to continue to provide power and service such that the stackers can be operated. And as mentioned by staff earlier on, failing that, the stackers can be operated manually. We can lower and raise the stackers should no power be available, even through the generator. The stackers themselves operate with one open space available all the time, and they shift both vertically and horizontally. Okay, so you'll basically have a specific stacking space, whoever rents or purchases the parking spot, and the stacker system will run to that space and depart from that space each time. We have looked at as well, there was a concern expressed about the queuing and should there be a power outage, whether it would back up into the street. We did a queuing analysis, and based on the fact that there are 4 actually stacker systems in the underground, all working independently, we found that queuing of no more than 5 vehicles would occur less than 10% of the time. So even on that rare occasion, the queuing won't be as bad as perceived based on our analyses that we provided in our parking study. I wanted to talk a little bit about TDM. TDM are basically strategies, measures to both curb single occupant vehicle demand while encourage alternative modes, i.e. amenities for pedestrians, cycling, and transit. It's the site and situational characteristics of this site that make it an ideal application development to look at a significant reduction in parking. The reason for that is that based on our analyses, there's a walkability score of 98%. This is a walker's paradise, this site. The transit score is 85%. Already in this area, we have an alternative mode split of 30%. So that's basically 30% of residents are utilizing a mode other than a vehicle. In this area as well, almost 50% of those that rent or own an apartment they don't own a vehicle. So 50% already in this area don't own a vehicle. There was discussion about the availability of the off-street parking spaces. So again, we did an analysis within a 400-meter radius. There's a quantum of about 1,150 off-street parking spaces available. Now, we recognize that the utilization of those off-street spaces is high during the day, but the peak parking demands for this primarily residential development would tend to be more in the evening, and you could also associate a higher peak demand in the evening for the commercial as well. So while there might be a high utilization of those spaces during the day, it's assumed that a lot of those would be freed up and available in the evening for visitation and longer-term parking. The TDM measures that we're proposing, including car share, we're providing 3 car share spaces, the unbundling of parking, so that's in effect, they're selling the unit and they're selling the parking or renting the parking space separate from the sale of the unit. Pedestrian and cycling orientation, we're looking at additional bike storage, 50 bike parking spaces for the site to support the alternative mode of cycling. And we're looking at subsidizing transit passes for the first 2 years for any of the residents that would desire to take advantage of that opportunity or amenity. The City of Hamilton currently has a draft TDM policy in place, and we've utilized a methodology that is recognized by the city and is in place in the region of Waterloo. And through this methodology, given the TDM measures that the development is planning to put in place, we've demonstrated here that we can get a reduction of parking in the order of 52%, which would reduce the zoning bylaw requirement from, I believe it's 193 to 100, or sorry, from 193 to 93, given the 100 parking stall reduction available utilizing this methodology. That's it.
Before we finish, we just have one. It's a promotional video that's on YouTube, but it will give all of you an opportunity to see the type of development, the size, what the units are going to look like inside. It's only 2 minutes long, so if I can indulge the councillors, I'd like to show it to you. All right?
It's not something we normally do, but if it's only 2 minutes.
There's no audio. There's some really good music to get you all pepped up, but it gives you an idea of the size, its presence in the community. Have a join if you want to. Oh, there we go.
There you go.
That's the front. That's facade along Jackson Street. As you walk in off Jackson. You can see up top the glass, that one showed you the glass, the transept windows that we're hoping to retain and reuse. A living wall that's proposed inside. So that would be the lobby for the condo units. These would be some of the common amenity spaces for the residents. The third floor. You can just see a bit of a patio out on the left side of the screen there. That's one of the suites.
Oh, no problem. I thought you meant another type of video, so that we do permit that.
Have you had to entertain any questions?
Yes, thank you, Brenda.
Stu or our architect or the owner, if you have any questions.
So at this point, I have Councillor Collins, and he's not in the room. Councillor Farr, please.
You addressed some of the residents' questions prior to, and I'm sure others that will be coming forth, but on this unbundling to our Paradigm representative through you, Madam Chair, the cost of a spot, as I recollect, was it you can either buy it or you can rent it?
At this point in time, there's going to be a rental option only at this point in time, and we're not sure. We haven't drilled down and firmed up a cost.
Given the number of spots, though, I'm assuming, the limited number, you would raise the price. It's a commodity, I guess, through you.
Yeah, they would be at a premium with the intent that it would help discourage parking on demand and reduce the parking demands overall.
Which was my third point. It actually works to promote the alternate modes that you're presenting here.
Correct. That's what the
have in our report.
Yes, that's the key characteristic of the unbundling aspect is that it works towards discouraging the parking demands.
Okay, and I just missed it. You said 98% we scored on walkability for this site. Through
Correct.
you, Chair, what was the 80%?
85% transit score. So given the proximity of the transit amenity in the immediate area.
Okay, thank you.
All right, thank you. And actually, if I could pass the chair over to you, Councillor Farr, and I just have a question with regards to the backup system. And I just wanted to clarify, did I hear you say that your backup power system was a cogen system? Could you just explain that a little bit further?
That's the name brand of the system. I'm not the electrical engineer.
Okay, so it's not the cogen system that we have currently in downtown. All right, that's fine. So that was my question, and I'll take back the chair now. Thank you. And I have Councillor Collins. All right, and thank you. So I have no further questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Appreciate the presentation. And motion to receive, Councillor Farr, Councillor Conley, all in favor. Carried, thank you. And now we'll go back to the public. I apologize for that, and I'll invite Janice Brown from the Durand Neighborhood Association to please come down. Welcome to our world. It's definitely not hot down here. Welcome, Janice.
Thank you, thank you. Can you hear me?
We can hear you.
Wonderful. I shall sign in.
Actually, you've already registered, so I don't think
I don't have to. Oh, good. You've got. Well, I know you can find me, so I've been told. I won't. I do have a written presentation, and parts of it I will exclude because Jonathan addressed the feelings of the Durand. This is in my way. Jonathan, the Durand Neighborhood Association and where we stand with regard to the development. However, since the staff report came out, we have a few other concerns that we definitely need to address. So I'll go right into those. We have been dealing with staff, but unfortunately we haven't been able to get all of our answers. So this is an absolute perfect time for us to get some answers to some very important considerations. And I'm glad to see that councillors have come back. I was missing you when you left the room, so thank you for coming back.
Well, just to clarify, when their councillors are in the ante room, this is all broadcast. They can hear every word that's being said.
Oh, so there's lunch in there. Wonderful. That's great. We could use lunch about this time. Doug doesn't even know that. Anyway, let's get on to serious things here. And this is with regard to the development implications of the existing light easement. We have a concern, and according to the staff report, and that's in your package, the owner of 100 James Street South is currently exploring and marketing development options for the site, including adding additional stories to this building. It is our understanding that the property is currently zoned, that property, at 100 James Street South, D2, which could allow for up to 6 stories. However, the report also confirms that there is a light easement in place on 100 James Street South in favor of 98 James Street South. The DNA wishes some clarification on the restrictive implications of this light easement on the properties that share the boundaries to the light easement. We would like to know the development restrictions in height and setback for 100 James Street South by way of this light easement. We would like to know the specifics of how the light easement allows for an increase in the spatial separation and limiting distance requirements under the Ontario Building Code for the proposal at 98 James Street South. It is clear that without this light easement, the curtain wall, the so-called podium, glazing along the bottom three-star podium on the south elevation of 98 James Street South would not be possible as it is in such close proximity to the property line. And to date, we have only the following from city staff, so I will read what was given to us last Thursday or Friday. The property located at 100 James Street South is subject to an easement in favor of 98 James Street South, formerly the James Street Baptist Church, with regard to light along the south lot line of 98 James Street South. The deed registered on title on 100 James Street South, instrument number VM261216, indicates that the property is subject to an easement for light from and over the 25 feet of the lands herein immediately adjoining on the south the said northerly 117 feet of said lots 75 and 76 as contained in the deed from John Rosebrug to William J. Kopp, dated August 7th, 1878, and registered in the Registry Office for the County of Wentworth in the book for the City of Hamilton on September 6, 1878, as instrument number 18856, and together with the benefit of the covenant as to building restrictions contained in the said instrument. Staff knows that this instrument is somewhere, but they have yet to produce it for us. So hopefully, since last Thursday or Friday, we are able to find that. So with regard to what we did learn last Thursday or Friday, we have the following questions that we would like to have answered by staff. And this is complicated for those of us that are doing this. We are not planners. We are just ordinary citizens trying to do our homework. So any of the questions that I have, I really would appreciate that they come back in writing to us so that we can fully understand. I'm one of those folks that still deal in hard copy. I cannot read from a computer. So your help in this matter would really be appreciated so that we could understand. So our following questions are we correct to understand that this light easement from 1878 cited would only restrict building on that 25-foot strip of land and does nothing to stop a multi-story building on the same property at 100 James Street South from blocking the view and light of the property of 98 James Street South? Are there no shadow restrictions? And as you can recall from that promo video that we saw, they show that building at 100 James Street South as being a one-story building as it currently exists now. So this is a very important consideration. Is there an agreement in principle between the City of Hamilton and Stanton Renaissance and or their architect that allows for a greater percentage of glazing on the south face of 98 James Street South than allowed under the Ontario Building Code limiting distance requirements based on the fact there is a light easement on the adjacent property restricting development within the 25-foot strip of adjacent property? And we know that there are some changes already to the glazing on Jackson and James Street, so we just are wondering about the impact in light of a possible multi-story development. And thirdly, is it recorded anywhere of a reason or purpose of this easement from 1878, such as to restrict development adjacent to the church at 98 James Street South to allow for light and views to the church property, or is this just an assumed purpose? And as I've said to you, we have not yet received responses, so we hope we get them today or soon. And we've done a little bit of homework on what we found out, and for the benefit of the audience and people that are sitting here, not necessarily staff, because I know that you know, I'd like to share this. The DNA understands that a light easement is a type of negative easement that prevents an adjoining landowner from building a structure that would obstruct the passage of light from reaching the dominant land. The right to receive a minimum quantity of light is the purpose of this type of easement, with secondary purposes that often relate to the right to fresh air and preservation of views. Further, the DNA understands that an owner may require a light easement to prevent or limit the construction of an adjacent building along a common property line to ensure the continued availability of natural light. Such an easement is generally obtained through negotiation, since it often diminishes the use and the value of the adjacent landowner's property, and that would obviously be 100 James Street South. A payment of money is generally required for granting such an easement. The DNA can only assume that the original builders of the former James Street Baptist Church would have negotiated this easement at a great cost to ensure natural sunlight be guaranteed, and that large expanses of primary south-facing glazing be granted even at such close proximity to the property line. It is also possible that the light easement served to ensure views of the church facade would remain unobstructed by future development. What seems certain is the easement went on title of property and has continued in effect through generations and carried with it the restrictive covenants on the neighboring landowner. In summation, can the city further clarify the development implications from the light easement on both landowners, including from where the spatial separation and limiting distance setback would be taken for a future proposal at 100 James Street South? That concludes our concern following the staff report. Further to that, we have a concern with transparency by way of public engagement by the city with respect to this file for 98 James Street South. And I'm just going to give you a brief chronology that follows the chronology that staff presented on page 2 or 3 of the report. And I'm not going to cover all of them because we weren't involved with all, but starting in September 13th, 2013, Heritage Permit HP 2013-058 was submitted. In October 2013, the DNA emails Councillor Farr to request that he addresses our concerns to appropriate city staff, specifically to emphasize that demolition and subsequent redevelopment cannot be considered independently. January 2nd, 2014, Heritage Permit approved by Permit Review Committee. The DNA has no opportunity to voice its objections as the partial demolition alteration application followed the approval route through the Heritage Permit Review Committee, a subcommittee of the Municipal Heritage Committee, to the Director of Planning. That process is currently under review, so I am delighted with that. Finally, May 22nd, 2014, this was presented at the Design Review Panel. According to the panel's mandate, meetings are open to the public and minutes are taken. The DNA requested the minutes. We were told there were no minutes. However, on page 42, there are several notations made by the panel, and our question, why would these not have been made available upon request by the DNA? August the 6th, 2014, there was an open house and an information session. Directors of the DNA attended and we completed the comments chart. September the 30th, 2014, there was a circulation of notice of complete application. The DNA did not receive this notice. Our mailing address does not happen to lie within the 120 meters. This is difficult to comprehend considering the DNA has been active with this file since September 2013. Fortunately, a DNA member on the distribution list who lived at the 36 James Street South, which is the Piggott building, advised us of the application. Councillor Farr also did not inform us. In his defense, this was during municipal elections. So I can totally understand it was a very busy time for many of our councillors, and probably not the first time that something did not get to the appropriate folks. The DNA, however, sent its submission November the 5th, 2014, and that's in Appendix D of this particular report. October the 9th, 2014, apparently there was a revised notice of complete application circulated. Again, we did not receive this. December 19th, 2014, there was a notice of public meeting mailed to 324 properties. The DNA did not receive this notice. Councillor Farr, however, provided the notice to the DNA on January the 6th, 2015, because he was at our monthly board meeting. Considering our submission was received by planning, and I had a conversation at that time that indicated we had a well-documented report, and we were acknowledged. We asked, why did we in heaven's name not receive notice that I could be standing here January the 13th, 2015? Having said that, on page 54, this report concludes with the alignment to the 2012-2015 strategic plan. The DNA directs you to strategic priority number 2 and strategic objective 2.2, improve the city's approach to engaging and informing citizens and stakeholders. In conclusion, the DNA requests that the planning staff and council consider reviewing and improving engagement and informing citizens and stakeholders to address this obvious lack of transparency by way of public engagement by the city, as the DNA has experienced with 98 James Street South. As a volunteer, long-time board member, the frustration has been beyond. We just want the details and let us function. Having to send numerous emails, having to claw for information, and knowing that there is information out there that we are not receiving, to me, is inappropriate. The DNA, I will remind anybody in this room, I say it often, we have been here since 1972. We have never stopped fighting the battle. We are out there. You can find us anywhere. So we just would love the respect. You talk about engagement, let's walk the talk. I'm sorry, but I had to say that. If you have any other questions, I'd be pleased to answer them.
Thank you very much, Janice. I have no speakers, so may I have a motion? Oh, Councillor Farr?
Through you to Janice. You concluded on engagement. You've spoken, I believe, to our new general manager of planning.
I continue to speak to him, and as I said, we are starting to get some things in place. But we spoke to him prior to this going out. The meeting date was December the, sorry,
the chair, please.
I'm sorry, I don't know the rules. I've been here enough, I know how to talk. Through the chair, I do apologize. We went to a meeting December the 16th. I can only deal with what we have experienced. I absolutely, and we, the Durand Neighborhood Association, and any of us that are engaged, we are absolutely delighted. So I am just bringing to light, we've got new councillors sitting around this table, we have new people sitting around the table. This is a good way for you to find out what we are doing here and what things are happening.
Okay, Janice. Through you, Chair, on this to staff, and we've brought this up before, and certainly there are examples in this particular case. We started the day by suggesting that we're setting a few precedents with the Connolly design. And we also did, in with respect to answering the question of engagement, I think, somewhere in the midst of this process, we sat down with the DNA president before us now, representatives from the executive, good friends of Heritage as well in the room, with our director of planning and economic development and other city staff, and devised this new way to look at delegated authority and permit review. And we are actually from that engagement session just across the hall, we devised a motion that was approved last term at Planning Committee, and we are changing some things. So that's just another precedent that we set through this particular design, and I think touches a little on engagement. Through you to maybe Robichaud, as I have dealt with this in the past with Janice, and she comes to rely on my office, which sometimes is either in the middle of an election campaign or very busy, and we've changed our approach to try as much as possible to get to not only this neighborhood association but all 5 others in a ward that has a neighborhood association in every corner, to get the word out whenever information and memos are passed along to me, whether they be development applications or otherwise. Do we need to, through you to Steve, to prevent this concern from continuing, work into our policy on notifying the public, in addition to the, I believe it's now 300 meters, or is it still 150?
120 meters.
Still 120? Do we need, in addition, to reflect an amendment that speaks to, if there is a neighborhood association, that no matter what, whether they're within that 120 meters or not, they be notified? I mean, actually put it in policy, because me, staff, and others have dropped the ball on this from time to time, and there's no doubt that what Janice says is true here.
Mr. Robichaud?
Thank you very much, Chair. Through the Chair to the Board, Councillor, the short answer is no. I've had some discussions with various members of the Planning Committee and other members of Council, and one of the things I am wanting to achieve in 2015 is to look at our public participation process. And we're in the process now. We're just going to compile a list of all the various neighborhood associations, and we'll be reaching out to the members of Council for any of those contact information, so that we will have a list, and that we will ensure that development applications within certain areas, the neighborhood associations are automatically notified of those applications. That's something that we are dealing with. So there is it's not necessary for a motion or a direction of Council to deal with the notification of the neighborhood associations. If Council wanted to increase the mail out from the statutory requirements of 120 meters to another number, then I think in that case it would probably be best to be a direction from Council to do that, so it's not an arbitrary process. So we would have to say, pick a new, say it's 250 meters or whatever that number would be, and then we would ensure that our circulation reflected what would be now Council's policy, which would go above and beyond the minimums required by the Planning Act.
Okay, I thought we did talk about, that's why I said 300. I thought we did talk about extending the length to communicate, but regardless of that, through you to Janice, are you satisfied with that answer?
Yes.
In short, Steve says in 2015, we're addressing exactly what you're talking about.
Yes, I appreciate that. And if I might, through the chair, Steve, you talked about it would have to be something that Council would have to make a motion on to increase the distance. I will just make one point with regard to who received notification. I understand it was 324 residences, and the Piggott building is not even in the Durand neighborhood. So it's not even part of our neighborhood, and I know my neighborhood very well, and there are not a whole lot of residential houses in the 120 meters. So knowing that there were not huge number of complaints, mind you, our association and members rely on the Durand to do due diligence, which we try to do. I would imagine that there were not that many residential places that got that notice. And around that area, and I know if I look at Bold Street, we've got a lot of commercial, and we have small apartment buildings, and we have very few single family or duplex homes. And then we get into large apartment buildings. So our neighborhood is unique.
Through you, I had more of a commentary than a question, but good to reflect on that. We are dealing with a different egg altogether in this particular location. So just on the light easement, Janice,
Yes, this is very important.
I highlighted through you to Janice, Chair. I've highlighted your questions. There are many, and so there are 5. Sorry, I shouldn't say many. You have good questions.
We've had answers on 2 of the questions. Excuse me, through the chair.
Please let the councillor finish, and then I will come back to you.
That's another one of my problems. I apologize.
Just settle down,
You should see us in
please.
a public meeting.
Go ahead.
Through you to Janice. So you're satisfied. Initially, Alyssa Golden gave a great response and clearly went way back in time to the 1800s, 1878, to offer some of your questions with relation to light easement. However, you have 5 other here. Would it be satisfactory? 3 others on light easement? Okay. 5 in total that I want to address with staff following today's public meeting. Would it be satisfactory to you, through the chair, if we met with the appropriate staff? I will ask staff here today if it's feasible for them before ratification at council that these light easement questions of yours are addressed in writing, as you have noted here today that you suggested you'd like. Would it be satisfactory to you for me to go about your answers in that capacity?
Yes, through the chair. Yes, that is extremely important because, again, this is a common commentary, it has been brought to our attention that these condominiums are being sold on the fact that this 3-story podium with uninterrupted views will be there. So there are issues with 198. So this is a very important consideration.
And finally, through
Counselor?
you to Ed or Anita or Steve, I know you've seen this latest installment of the DNA correspondence. Is there anything out here that of the 3 questions with respect to this issue of light easement that you can't address in short order or even here today?
Through the chair to the councillor, certainly we are aware of the light easement, as the presenter updated council and committee with. In terms of answering those questions, I think it probably would be best to meet offline with the applicant. It is a private agreement, and I know the presenter wishes to know some of the information that may be within that private agreement, and we will require the attendance, therefore, of the applicant. Beyond that, certainly we're aware of it, and nothing through the zoning bylaw will affect the OBC. I think the presenter raised that as an issue, but certainly I think this is best addressed offline, and then we can respond in fullness.
Yeah, it would be appropriate to do that offline. All right, thank you. Councillor?
Thank you, Madam Chair. What did you think of that?
I am fine with that. I think they're important considerations, and that's why I'm here today. And I thank you for your time, and the Durand neighborhood certainly appreciates the opportunity for all the public engagement we can possibly have access to and engage in. Thank you, and Happy New Year.
And we appreciate you coming down, Janice. Thank you very much, and all the good work that the DNA does.
Thank you, Judy.
Motion to receive, please. Councillor Farr, Councillor Aidan Johnson, all in favor. That is carried. Thank you. Are there any other members of the public wishing to address the committee on this issue? Please come down and write your name and address, postal code and telephone number on the sheet provided. Joey, you know the drill.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'd like to reinforce the point that the Durand Neighborhood Association made in regards to the design review panel meeting. The short version, I filed a Freedom of Information request, a formal Freedom of Information request, after staff denied informally the information. Request 14-072. I'm a journalist. I filed numerous FOI requests. I know exactly how to word it to get documents and make it broad. The response back from the Freedom of Information Office, not surprisingly, I have very low expectations of that office, and they have consistently rated worse than Canada.
Please be careful, Joey.
I'm stating fact. The newspaper Canada's audit, year after year, Hamilton this year was so bad it didn't even get an F. It had no mark. I received back that there was no records that the FOI office could provide, but to contact the planning department again to see if they had records. The response back from the planning department was there were no responsive records. There was no record of this meeting. So I was surprised, much like the DNA, to see that staff have found records. That's good. Under the FOI process, those records should have been immediately disclosed to a person who was denied the information. Some background leading up to why I had to use Freedom of Information to get public information. So you may recall that when the design review panel was debated at council, there was a very healthy discussion about whether design review panel would be open to the public. The councillor who sat where Mr. Conley now sits and staff had a very lively debate about the matter. Staff rightfully have the opinion that it would not be good for the process to be open. That is an acceptable opinion for staff to have in their professional capacity. As you may recall, the councillor for Ward 9 at the time said to staff, well, if council passes that it's open, it's open. Staff can give their recommendation, council makes the decision. Council was very clear. They voted that the meetings would be open to the public, that they would be fully transparent. On April 12th, I found out that there had been a design review panel meeting with no public notice. I emailed the Director of Planning requesting the membership of the design review panel, minutes for the meetings that had already been held, agendas for those meetings, and future meeting dates. These emails, I've emailed the clerk for the record, this chain of emails. I received no response. I give 2 weeks of no response before I follow up. I contact the city manager's office to request their assistance in getting this information. On April 30th, I read in a Toronto publication, the membership. The city has disclosed the information to a Toronto publication. This is well and good. I believe the city should be disclosing information. On May 1st, follow up again. In this email, I am very clear that for the purposes of MFIPA, this is an attempt to informally resolve the situation and receive the information. I am clear to staff. I say, do I need to formally file a Freedom of Information request to get this public information? There is no response. The city manager's office does respond saying that they're looking into it. The following day, I set a 2 p.m. deadline for the purposes of MFIPA to state that I will file an FOI request. This is required under MFIPA if I have to go to appeal. I have to prove that I've been very clear to the city. It was not meant to be seen as a threat to the city. It was the purposes of legislation. I also sent the acting general manager on this asking for his assistance. The city manager's office contacts me, states that they believe that they can get the information. On May 5th, a partial disclosure is given. Again, remember, I'm asking for the membership of a committee, minutes, agendas, and meeting dates. I'm not asking for complex information here, folks. The partial disclosure was the agendas, not the minutes, of the meetings that had already occurred. On May 20th, I read in the Hamilton Spectator that there's going to be a design review panel meeting. Again, I still have not been disclosed the information I requested, including meeting dates. I asked for the agenda of this meeting. I never receive it. On May 22nd, I attend City Hall to attend a meeting which by the bylaw is open to the public. I am denied access to this public meeting. It is made clear to me that the denial is directed at me. The councillor was here in the building and attempted to intervene. Unfortunately, his efforts were unsuccessful at the time. We decided that we would resolve the matter afterwards. We had an improper closed meeting. Unfortunately, because it was not under the Municipal Act, an open meeting, I did not have the option of going to Andre Moran, the Ontario Ombudsman. From this, I followed up with the FOI to the city manager. Now, I'm noting the timeline to you because it is important. I exercised many efforts to access this meeting. The resolution that I request from council is that the design review panel meeting of May 22nd be considered invalid. It was not properly held and open to the public. I don't know if there's minutes now, if they found minutes, but there's some serious questions about process here. I believe that we need a clear council direction that the design review panel meeting that is suggested in this report be open to the public and that be made very clear. I do wish to note that much like the Durand Neighborhood Association, I've had numerous meetings with the new general manager and Mr. Robichaud. I feel that the issues that occurred here have been resolved. I want to be clear of that. But we still have the issue of the meeting itself and the validity of the meeting. If this was a council meeting and the Ontario Ombudsman ruled that it was improperly closed, whatever occurred in that meeting would have to be redone in public. I believe the same standard should be applied here. I wish to further add that in the matter of notice of public meetings, this is an ongoing matter. Open data. Thank you.
All right. Thank you very much, Joey. And Councillor Farr, you have a question?
I was holding my breath until Joey said right near at the end that
Open
the issue
data
has been resolved. So I was glad to hear that, but I'm glad as well, Madam Chair, that he had an opportunity to share with all of us what was, a bit of maybe a little too much work for Joe to try to achieve being part of this panel and getting minutes. Through you to Steve, so I should ask Joe. So the issue has been resolved through the chair. Do you feel, Joey, going forward, we won't have that issue again?
I'm very confident that going forward, we will not have that issue again. I will note that under the organizational changes that Mr. Robichaud has instituted in the past couple months, his department is one of, if not the most transparent that I'm dealing with currently at the city. In fact, I only need to CC Mr. Robichaud when I'm asking for public information from planners. I can walk up to the floor and request to see a file, and there is no obstacle or difficulty. Staff are very accommodating in his division now, so I'm actually quite happy where we've gone. I do believe that the council needs to give resources for open data. I will note that in the 2015 budget proposal, there's only one mention of open data, and that's that it's a goal to implement by 2015, but there's no funds or implementation of it in 2015.
Councillor?
So I would receive at the appropriate time if there's no other questions, and there may be, but and then I'll have some, with respect to this delegation, 2 questions for staff at your appropriate time.
All right, so we'll receive the delegation. Joe, thank you so much for coming forward.
Thank you.
I very much appreciate it. And motion to receive, Councillor Farr, Councillor Conley, all in favor? That is carried. Okay, and Councillor Farr, you have.
So it was the very first, as I recall, design review panel meeting, and again, another precedent center. And Joey's obviously, prior to being a delegate here today, Madam Chair, has worked with staff and myself to some capacity anyway, mostly with staff, to be satisfied as we move forward with this particular issue. And council did, and I think it was Councillor Collins who suggested when he moved the design review panel, and I was happy to second it, but we also did debate last term of council in planning committee whether or not to make the meetings public. And we went with public in an effort to maintain our mandate to be as transparent as possible. This one was interesting because what we have in these design review panel meetings are experts, architects, and designers from across the region, many Toronto, I understand, looking at what we were presented in the very first public meeting here today, the Connolly, which is quite obviously a multi-million-dollar development, and there's probably a whole marketing team behind this development, and they want to control the message, control the design, and control how they advertise and market the product. But the design review panel meeting happened 4 or 5 months ago or more. And it's in those meetings that these experts that we have around the table who graciously are volunteering their time for this very progressive panel that Councillor Collins put together are actually looking at these pictures. And so I could understand, and I've said this to Joe, how the owners and the people that are investing multi-millions of dollars would want to control how those pictures get out there. So I believe that since this incident in the very first design review panel meeting in the very first development have been addressed, but through you, and to be clear, Madam Chair, to Steve Robichaud, we have addressed that concern on both sides of the issue, Steve?
Steve?
Through you, Madam Chairman, yes. We knew that at the beginning of the process, because the design review panel was a pilot project, the terms of reference, the way the panel would operate, that we would sort of muddle through at the beginning until we sort of worked out some of the kinks and some of the bugs in the system. Anita and myself have been canvassing with some of our colleagues in other municipalities with design review panels to identify some additional best practices or how to further refine the process. And we've been now reporting back to the design review panel on the changes that are necessary to make in order to improve the operating efficiency of the panel and ensure that it meets its mandate, which from day one was always that the meetings would be open to the public. One of the issues that we did have was dealing with the issue of confidentiality and how the applicants, if they wanted to come to the panel prior to making a Planning Act application and prior to them wanting to make their plans available to the public. As I've said before, that once you make a Planning Act application, everything is public, but sometimes people want to come to the panel when they're still trying to work on their design, and how can they get some very early feedback from the panel while they're still thinking about the proposal. So that's one of the changes that we've been working with the members and talking to our colleagues in other municipalities to refine that process, and we're continuing to look at refining that process so that when we report back at the end of either this year or early next year on the design review panel and how we can make it better and continue to provide get maximum good quality advice from the panel members.
Councillor?
Great, and thanks again to our delegate who stepped in our muddling, which is fine because it was obvious from the start when we passed this last term that it is public. So finally, the suggestion from the delegate, Steve, through you, Chair, was to make what is really a half a page in this major report on the Connolly invalid, the DRP information invalid. How would we go about that if we wanted to, given that we're actually at the point where it's informed our discussion here today?
Through Madam Chairman, one of the things to remember is that the design review panel is actually, the terms of reference for that panel is being endorsed by council, but it's an advisory committee to staff. It is actually a subcommittee of committee or planning committee or council, so it does operate in a bit more of a less structured arrangement than we would with, say, a council committee. One of the issues that we had early in the process was how we dealt with the minutes. The second meeting is when this project was considered by the design review panel, and for procedural reasons, we never had the minutes, were never formally adopted by the design review panel, and the panel then one meeting we didn't have a quorum, and then there wasn't any meetings for a period of time while we were looking at refining the process. I would think that what we have here are basically just some notes that were sort of in some discussions, but I think that they still, to help inform the process. We will go back, and once all that information can be made available, finalized by the committee, in terms of the formal minutes, the agendas, all the documentation, we have no problem sharing that and making it available to anyone and everyone who asks for that information. But I would think that generally what the panel's advice would be consistent with what our own urban design staff would recommend in terms of dealing with the application, as well as staff's own assessment. In many cases, the panel in this was sort of reinforcing what some of the concerns and considerations that staff had. And on a go-forward basis, we would continue to look for the advice of the design review panel in terms of providing input into both the site planning process and any other approvals that come out of this.
Thank you, Steve. Councillor?
That was a more long-winded a response than most of my questions, so thank you. Thank you, Steve. It really is, I'm just looking at it from a committee member, looking at where, I read this report front and back a couple of times now, and I was very interested in seeing where the design review panel comments would play into the report. 42 of 55 is the page number. And while it was limited, it informed, but I can't see, actually now that you've made your comment, Steve, I would withdraw making any attempt, notwithstanding Joe's delegation, in trying to omit those 4 paragraphs from the report. But I did find them more intriguing than helpful regardless. And I don't see how taking them out would have any effect on our approval here today, Madam Chair.
Okay, thank you, Councillor. And Councillor Green, please.
Madam Chair, just through you in speaking directly to some of the process issues that Mr. Coleman had suggested regarding freedom of information, the definition of what is public versus not public. These are things that are of concern to me, and I'm hoping that the resolutions that have been brought forward through this process will be certainly implemented in future processes. I know that sometimes as we're trying to work through new processes that we might not have all the answers, and my hope is that through you to the staff that is communicated as such accordingly, so as not to leave people hanging for weeks at a time without the proper resolution. If we don't have the answer, or if we don't have proper terms of reference, if as the answer was communicated through you from Mr. Robichaud, if that is the answer, and I believe that we have a duty to communicate that properly to the community.
Thank you, Councillor. All right, so I have no more further comments or questions, and I did see Diane Dent. There she is, yes. Come on down. Diane, if you wouldn't mind, I don't think you're registered. If you wouldn't mind signing in at the appropriate time, that would
I'll do it at the end,
terrific.
right, to save you time, right?
Yes.
Thank you, Madam Chair, for letting me speak. I've been doing this since 1972, and let me tell you, I get more nervous every time. Why am I here today? I'm here today because I may be the only one in this room who does not support the intensification at James Street Baptist Church. Why? For me, intensification should be placed on a vacant lot, a parking lot, not at the demolition of a heritage building. This is hindsight. I didn't come forward before, but I think with the new members of council and with Jason Thorne, who seems to be listening, that it's important I make some comments. So I've already talked about intensification, and a former colleague, Chad Collins, I'm surprised that he approves of this intensification, but I know that this city needs intensification. I'm not against intensification. I'm just against intensification when it is the demolition of a heritage building. So why are we all here today? We're here today because of delegated authority, which you've heard about. Delegated authority was brought in 2003, 2005 by Tim McCabe. He came to the Municipal Heritage Committee and he said, in order to get permits moving faster, heritage permits, so people didn't have to wait, if it was a window, if it was a door, if it was paint, something very minor, he wanted that permit to go from permit review right to his office. In my opinion, the demolition of 3/4 of a heritage building or 80% of a heritage building is not a minor alteration. However, at permit review, after hearing the owner speak 3 times, 4 members of permit review out of 500,000 citizens approved the demolition of James Street Baptist Church. 2 of us denied it. We had no minutes. We did not have written comments in front of us, but that is hindsight, and Jason Thorne is reviewing that. So the permit review, 4 members did approve that demolition. We didn't have any public input at that meeting. There were people from the public, Philip Hode, David Kooming, the Durand Neighborhood Association. They kept texting me to saying we need a peer review. At a public meeting, I put my BlackBerry away. I guess I shouldn't have, because maybe there would have been more force behind my request for a peer review. A peer review would have been a heritage engineer from the City of Hamilton's list to look at the stability of the church. We were told by the proponent and his engineer that he was a heritage engineer, that he'd done 3 peer reviews, or had done 3 reviews, but not a peer review. So following up from this, perhaps staff and council would look at what happened at the Tivoli. I am told by David Kooming, who was the senior heritage planner here, that after the demolition of the front part of the Tivoli, that from that moment on, anytime a heritage building was to be demolished, a heritage engineer from the list of the city would be employed. That didn't happen. So without delegated authority, from 1972 until 2003, 2005, what did members of this city council with citizens, what did you do? You promoted preservation as adaptive reuse. What were the examples? The Carnegie Library, which is now the Unified Family Court. The Bank of Montreal, which is now Gowlings. The Pigot Sun Life, which is now condos. Central Public School, which is supposed to be emptied, but now it's full. The Post Office, which is now the Sipinka Courthouse. And other examples. How did they come about? Those buildings, some of them were to be demolished. They weren't demolished because the councillor of the ward, Ward 2, who always has the biggest burden, with consultation, Bill McCullough, Vince Agro, with all the members of council, preserved those buildings. That didn't happen because, in this case, of delegated authority. If we had not had delegated authority, all the members of council and the planning committee would have had time to look at this proposal. I guess I'm not a very good loser, but it's the democracy. And if there had not been delegated authority and you had approved this proposal, I could stand and say, this is my city, this is democracy. We lost 80% of a heritage building, but we had delegated authority, so we didn't. So my concerns are intensification. We need it, but we don't need it at the expense of demolition of heritage buildings. 2, delegated authority, which fortunately Jason Thorne is looking at. 3, has a city engineer confirmed the stability of a 3-story tower at the proposed site because of the wet conditions at the base? We were told when we had a tour that the foundation was wet. The same thing happened at St. Mark's. Because of the underground streams, I hope the City Council and the planning staff will make sure that whatever has to go under the James Street Baptist Church, and I cannot call it the Connolly, he was the architect of the building, not the demolisher. Just make sure that those wet conditions will provide stability for what has to go underneath. You've talked about reduced parking. I'm still concerned with that. The light easement you've talked about, I'm concerned about that. Madam Chair, what you spoke about was the security of heritage elements removed for replacement in the new building. According to the Ontario Heritage Trust, there must be a letter of credit, and that letter of credit would ensure that the owner is responsible for any heritage artifacts that are removed for the building and that are to be repositioned in the new building, that if any of them are damaged, that the letter of credit, which may not be sufficient, I don't know, to cover that, but that would be the responsibility of City Council. So, Madam Chairman, thank you for allowing me to speak, and I hope I've clarified some of the points.
Yes, thank you, Diane, and always a pleasure to see you, and thank you very much for coming in. Do we have any questions for Diane? Councillor Farr?
Diane, as I mentioned earlier, was in the room with Janet Brown and our director of planning. Their delegation, that meeting not too long ago as it related to what had happened with the three-quarters demolition, not alteration, as Diane has told me and Janice, led to this review of the process. So I just wanted to commend Diane for many decades now of commitment to heritage, the delegation here today, and proof that engagement does work, and the process that you felt to be flawed is currently under a review, thanks to Steve and Jason, as you noted, and all the other staff who are working on that delegated authority process. So thank you.
Okay, thank you, Councillor, and thank you, Diane. Under your leadership, the process continues to strengthen, and I thank you for that.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and congratulations to you for being re-elected and to be a member of Municipal Heritage Committee and of this committee. I know it's not easy for you to make difficult decisions, but just so you know, it's even more difficult for those of us who have to come and present to you, because we either have to take time off work, or it's nerve-wracking, or we think we'll say the wrong thing. So thank you for being a gracious audience.
All right, thank you, Diane. Take care. All right, now I need to say this 3 times. Does anyone else wish to address the committee on this issue? Oh, I'm sorry. Yes, thank you. Councillor Green and Councillor Farr, all in favor? That is carried. Thank you. So 3 times. Does anyone else wish to be? Oh, very good. Aaron Kirsten, welcome.
Thank you, Madam Chair. As I was preparing my comments, I'm an old newspaper editor, as some of you know, and I was trying to come up with a headline. And the first headline I came up with was The Tale of Two Cities. And somebody's got dibs on that, so I couldn't use that. The second one I thought of was The Tale of Two Parking Lots. But I finally settled on the following headline: There is something the matter with this picture. I am the Executive Director of the Flamborough Chamber of Commerce, and I appreciate the opportunity to speak on this application in front of you today. The FCC has not adopted a formal position on the application before you today. We only received the agenda last week, and we have not been able to arrange a meeting to consider a formal position. But at a personal level, I would agree the proposal before you today makes a lot of sense on many different levels for a myriad of good reasons. This afternoon, I want to focus for a moment on the parking aspects of the application. If I read it right, the proposal is for a 30-story building with 259 condo units. Add to that 2 floors of retail and commercial space that add to the parking realities and challenges. However, there will only be 122 parking spaces, or roughly one for every 2 units. As I reviewed the staff report this past weekend, the first thought that came to mind was another issue related to parking. Councillor Farr will remember this very well, I'm sure. The young man who was working full-time in Toronto, when he was coming home every day, pursuing a dream of opening a small restaurant in North End Hamilton. He ran into a great number of obstacles, and he started to contact City Hall. He contacted City Hall over 100 times, 130 times, in fact, if I recall correctly, for help. Just a handful of his inquiries were answered, less than a dozen, as I recall. To Mr. Murray's credit, because of this young man's experiences with City Hall, new policies and procedures were implemented. But back to the parking aspects of the application at hand and what it has to do with Flamborough, of all places. Located on Highway 5 between Waterdown and Greensville is a farm implement dealership. It has been owned and operated by the Gaylor family for 3 generations. It plays an important part in supporting especially the rural economy, and I don't have to remind you that the rural economy in Hamilton represents economic activity of over $1 billion a year. A couple of years ago, the family decided to add a storage shed to the facility. It is a simple pole barn, 60 feet by 107 feet. I don't know if you know what a pole barn is, but I'm sure that Councillor Pasuta would be more than delighted to explain it to you. It's a simple structure, concrete floor, large wooden beams, metal cladding. It has no utilities, 2 walk-in doors, a large garage door. It doesn't even have windows, just some translucent panels in the roof to provide some light. It's strictly used for storage, not for retail. When the Gaylors went to the city for the necessary permits, they were advised it would take 6 to 8 weeks. For a variety of reasons, it took months and months. One of the biggest hurdles that the city demanded from the Gaylors was to provide 73 parking spaces. 73 parking spaces. As Andrew Gaylor, a grandson of the founder, said to me, quote, "We are a farm equipment dealership. We are not a Walmart. If we were, I'd be driving a Bentley." For years, Gaylor has had more than enough room with a total of 20 parking spaces. That includes room for vehicles belonging to the employees. But the city demanded 73 parking spaces. After your inaugural, the FCC sent Mayor Eisenberger a letter, copied to every member of council and to senior staff, making the case that 1, the city is facing significant financial challenges. An annual infrastructure deficit of almost $200 million is just one example of that. The letter made the case that 2, the residential taxpayer is maxed out. They simply can't afford to pay higher property taxes. The letter made out making the case that 3, the answer to Hamilton's fiscal challenges is to increase the ratio of commercial industrial property taxes from the current and anemic 13%. It is our understanding that a new proposed rural zoning bylaw will be before you on March 31st. Already many businesses in rural Flamborough are preparing to appear before you. They are convinced that the proposed changes will chase dozens and dozens, and some say even hundreds, of small businesses out of rural Flamborough, I mean the new Hamilton, into a more business-friendly jurisdiction such as Burlington and Brant. In conclusion, please consider the contrasts. On the one hand, 259 units in a 30-story building, complete with 2 floors for retail and commercial purposes, and a total of 122 parking spaces. On the other hand, a 65-year-old, 3-generation family business selling farm implements wants to add a 60 by 170-foot storage shed, and the city demands a total of 73 parking spaces. With the greatest of respect, there is something wrong with this picture. Thank you for your attention. We'll be back on March 31st. That's my presentation.
Thank you, Aaron. And I see no questions. Councillor Pasuta, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Aaron, for coming forward today. And it may seem odd that you're presenting as you have and what we're dealing with this building. But It's beyond that. We've had other ones down there, other buildings in the rural area, that storage buildings and other equipment dealers, supply dealers, that once upon a time when I first got in, they wanted over 200 parking spots for a building somewhat to similar size based on the use of it. And it was not to house people or anything. It's just interesting. You know, we have 259 units, 122 parking spaces. Based on the report we're looking at, it's going to be, and I don't know how you figure out who's going to live in these buildings. We're presuming it's going to be people using public transit, and they're going to have use of the GO and the buses. But what about people, you know, there's other businesses. People come to Hamilton for reasons, and particularly in the housing areas, cheaper housing. They come from Toronto where they can sell something for a lot of bucks, come here, buy a property, and put a lot of money into it to a lot better place to live in. I think we need to get the bigger picture and see how far we reach out from the city and the travel, and Brantford, Niagara Falls, Woodstock. Well, people live here and travel that far because we are not a big city. We've changed from the steel industry, and we're more into the medical, some manufacturing, and food industry too. So I think you know, it's a concern to me to see what we're doing here as far as the parking spaces is building. I think it's a great development. We need that. But it's the parking and the parking. And if I read the report right also, Aaron, I'm looking in here and it doesn't say anything about visitor parking. Lost because of the age of electronics and everything we do, and we just text and Facebook, that we don't have visitors anymore too. We haven't considered that, I don't think. But you made a great point by coming here forward today, Aaron, and talking about the rule and businesses out there. And we know we're dealing with the rural zoning coming up. And I just thank you for coming forward today and bringing attention.
I think, Madam Chair, I'll just finish that way. I think that the bottom line in all of this is that one size does not fit all. And I think you have to be very sensitive to that when the rural zoning bylaw comes in front of you at the end of March. I thank you for your time.
Yes, and thank you, Aaron. And if I just may make a comment myself, I think the other thing that you've illustrated is, you know, are we really open for business? And I don't want to get off on a rant on that. But, you know, in how we are treating our developments that come forward. This is a great development, and we do need it. But we need to, you know, roll out the red carpet for one, and yet for another, we put them through 2 years of almost living hell. And I know I have several in my ward that were all going through similar situations. And you know, staff are working very, very hard to resolve all of this, but I just think we need to be truly open for business for everybody. And one size does not fit all, but we need the development, whether it's in the rural area, rural applicable development, let me say that, and we need the intensification downtown as well. So I thank you for coming forward. Okay, and motion to receive, Councillor Pasuta and Councillor Conley. All in favor? That is carried. Now, I still need to say this 3 times. Is there anyone else who wishes to address the committee on this issue? Is there anyone else who wishes to address the committee on this issue? Anyone else wishing to address the committee on this issue? Seeing none. May I have a motion to close the public meeting, please? Councillor Green, Councillor Collins, all in favor? That is carried. And that brings us now to the staff report, and I need a motion on the staff report. All right, so Councillor Farr, you want, sorry, Madam Clerk.
Excuse me. Yes, I just, as Councillor Collins said, the amendments that were put forward, are they going to be included?
In the bylaw? Right. Okay, thank you. So I have a motion to move the staff report as amended. Councillor Farr, seconded by Councillor Collins. Any discussion? All in favor? That is carried. Anyone opposed? I'm seeing none. Thank you very much. And now we'll move on to discussion items. We have 8.1, which is the... Oh, I'm sorry. Thank you. Thank you. I'm trying to, march my way through the agenda. Yes. So on the main motion as amended, moved by Councillor Farr, seconded by Councillor Collins, and you'd like to speak on that?
You know what I'll do? I'll reserve my comments for council upon ratification, because I do believe this to be groundbreaking and precedent-setting in many ways, and as well I hope to find answer in writing where we can for the DNA in their presentation a little earlier. So I'll reserve for council my comments on the Connolly. Thank you. And move seconded by Councillor Collins with the amendments.
All right, thank you, Councillor, and all in favor. That is carried. Anyone opposed? Seeing no one opposed. Thank you. Now we'll move on to discussion items. And item 8.1 is the application for a Ministry of the Environmental Compliance approval for waste for lands located at 800 Parkdale Avenue North in Hamilton, and that is Ward 4. Are there any questions or discussion regarding item 8.1, please? All right, thank you, Madam Clerk. And as I understand, there are some amendments to 8.1. So if I could go to staff, to Heather Travis, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. We do have just two minor clarifications to the recommendation. These clarifications do not change the intent of staff's recommendation, which is that this waste transfer facility certificate of or environmental compliance approval should be approved, and we're making appropriate recommendations to the MOE in that regard. Just the applicant has requested clarity regarding recommendation AI4. This is information that is to be provided in a secure lockbox at the front gate of the facility. We've updated this recommendation to state that a product inventory list is to be provided at the end of each day if materials are being stored overnight at the facility. This change is satisfactory to City Fire Services and clarifies that the inventory list does not need to be updated in the lockbox all day long, rather that it must be updated and provided at the end of each daily shift. And the second change is to recommendation A, VIII, which is to add the words upon request at the end of the condition. This is required to clarify that while the inventory of waste must be updated daily, it does not need to be provided to the MOE on a daily basis. Rather, it must be provided when the MOE requests it. This change is acceptable to the MOE and to City staff, and the applicant is in agreement as well.
All right, thank you. So the applicant is in agreement. They have seen these, and
through you, Madam Chair, that's correct. The applicant is in attendance today if you wish to confirm.
Okay, thank you very much. So any further discussion on 8.1 with the amendments? This is amended to the report, right? Councillor Collins, please.
Just a quick question. I did not get an opportunity to speak to Councillor Marula about the application. Has staff had the opportunity to discuss with him?
Heather?
Councillor Marula did have discussions with the applicant, and my understanding was afforded the opportunity to tour the facility and had his any questions he had answered at that time. Again, the applicant is here in attendance who could provide further clarification to that meeting if required.
That's fine. If he's met with staff and the applicant and hasn't raised it with me, then I'm satisfied he's okay with it.
I think you would have heard from him by now. Yep. All right then. So may I have a motion on the amendments? Councillor Farr, Councillor Pasuta, all in favor? That is carried. And now on item 8.1 as amended, moved by Councillor Collins. You comfortable with that? Okay. Seconded by Councillor Conley. All in favor? Carried. All right. Thank you. Moving on to motions. We have no motions. Moving on to notices of motion. If I could turn the chair over to Councillor Farr, please. Now, I do have a notice of motion which I am going to put forward, but I'd like to waive the rules if I can get someone to move that for me. Councillor Collins and Councillor Pasuta? Aiden? Okay, thank you very much. So this motion, and I'm going to read it out here, it's regarding planning application fees. So whereas the development charges bylaw provides for a DC exemption for affordable housing projects from the requirement to pay development charges, and whereas the parkland dedication bylaw provides for an exemption for charitable nonprofit organizations from a cash in lieu payments, and whereas the planning application and growth management tariff of fees bylaw does not provide any exemption for charitable organizations or affordable housing providers from the requirements of the fee bylaw, and whereas charitable organizations and affordable housing providers provide a public benefit to the broader community. Therefore, be it resolved that Planning and Economic Department staff be directed to investigate and report back to the Planning Committee on options, including an assessment of the financial implications and funding sources to amend the applicable planning and growth management fee bylaw to provide discretion for the general manager or designate to waive the applicable fees for charities and not-for-profit organizations. And that's moved by myself and seconded by Councillor Collins. And this is something that I've been working on with staff, and it's come up in the past, particularly with organizations like Habitat for Humanity, where they're coming forward and requesting a relief from fees, and then we have other charitable organizations or not-for-profits who end up paying fees and then coming forward and asking for forgiveness, which of course we can't do. And so this really, we felt it's about time to direct staff to come back to us with a report on just what are the implications, making the process a little bit smoother, and that it be something that is considered ahead of time instead of putting the not-for-profits through it at the end of the day. So I'll turn it back to you, Chair, but that's my motion. And your microphone, sir.
Just a quick comment through you, Mr. Chair, to Councillor Partridge. I think it's fantastic motion, something I know is going to be coming up as the need for affordable housing and greater demands on that apply. So I'm glad to see that we're moving in that direction to get some clarity so that people can plan around that. So it's exciting. Thank you.
Yeah, I believe welcome, Councillor Pearson. You were just saying hi. Sure. Councillor Pearson's looking for a copy. Any other? No, nobody else? Okay, so moved by Councillor Partridge, seconded by Councillor Collins. All in favor of the motion before us? Any opposed? Seeing none, it carries. Thank you.
All right,
and I'll give you the chair back.
All right, thank you very much. I very much appreciate that. And my goodness. Yes, Councillor Collins. Okay, all right. So, and we are there right now, actually. General information and other business. Go ahead.
Thank you for that, Madam Chairman. And I have a quick question as it relates to the commercial facade program. I think soon after the election we received the third quarter update for 2014, and as I went through that list, you'll recognize all the projects that have received funding, either grant or loan funding from the city to help with commercial improvements for properties that are within, in many cases, most cases, BIAs, in other cases, in some of the central business districts of some of the former municipalities. There was one that caught my eye, and I'm hoping that staff, I don't expect an answer today, but under the commercial facade property grant program, there was a property on Regional Road, I think it was 56, where there was an expansion and a repaving and a widening of a driveway that actually somehow eligible for facade improvement program. So I'm unclear after reading that as to what the eligibility is for. I thought it was building improvements. I think the name of the program, Commercial Facade Property Grant Program, would suggest that it's building improvements, but when I read the description of the project, it's not a large sum of money, it's $21,000, but a driveway repaving and widening project for me just doesn't seem to fit the criteria or the intent of what originally the Commercial Facade Property Grant Program was intended to do. I thought it was to improve the aesthetic look of properties, increase assessment, help rejuvenate and regenerate some of our commercial districts. And if we're now into driveway repaving and widening, then I think so. I would just like staff to come back with the criteria, a clear criteria that we use right now to benchmark the applications that are submitted, and maybe some additional information related to the application in question.
All right, thank you, Councillor Collins. And Steve, if you got that? All right, and we'll come back. All right, thank you. Now, may I have a motion to approve the outstanding business list as amended under changes to the agenda to also include item 1D, or ID that is, I guess, as the bus-only lane report is on tomorrow's GIC agenda. Moved by Councillor Pearson, as she's here, seconded by Councillor Conley. All those in favor? Carried. Anyone opposed? Okay, thank you. We have no private and confidential, so may I have a motion to adjourn? Councillor Pearson, Councillor Pasuta, all in favor? Carried. You're in the minutes. Thank you, everyone.
Yeah, I can wrestle you now. Please don't help. Please don't help. Thank you. My husband. Oh, yeah. All right, fine.
Yes, I would try to be there.
Oh, it's okay. And just so you know, this song sent me an email right away.
Yes.
Can't make it unless I change the date.
Of course.
Really?
All things considered. Maybe it's a bad omen for tomorrow. Yeah.
All right. Yeah?
Yeah. Keep it busy. Yes. It's that time of year, right? Budget season, committee meeting season.
Yes.
Staff did respond via email method.
Okay, all right.
So I can send you that email just so you have it.
Yeah, that'd be
when I
great.
use it for the story. And that'll go up based on, with the commercial, which wasn't factored in.
Yeah, because they don't know what that is. Yeah. That's just the residential.
Yeah. That's if they
Little
sell
uptick.
for 250, if the average unit sells for 250.
Not bad. Do that 10 or 12 more times.
Yes, we'll be doing all right. Have a good one. Take care.